At 2 a.m., I found my daughter asleep at her desk, her cell phone still lit up beside her. I moved closer and carefully pulled a blanket over her shoulders, meaning to leave her to sleep. Then my eyes caught the screen and everything inside me went still. No text, no notification from some app. It was an email sitting in her sent folder, and the words I saw there turned my blood to ice. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where we bring you tales of family betrayal and the quiet strength that refuses to be broken. If stories like this one move, you come along for the journey and follow the channel so you never miss what comes next. Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Whose side did you find yourself on first, and did that feeling change as the story unfolded? This story contains fictional elements woven in for dramatic storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to real persons or events is entirely coincidental. What matters most is the truth at its heart. That is exactly what I want them to see. What they do not know is that for 30 years, I was a senior forensic auditor for the FBI. 3 decades spent chasing money, laundering operations, hunting white-collar criminals, and tearing apart corporate fraud schemes far more sophisticated than the man asleep in the master bedroom of this house. I bought this suburban Houston home for my daughter Nadia and her husband Derek 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where Nadia could build her architectural legacy and start a family. Instead, it had become a crime scene, and I was the only one who knew it. I had woken up with a dry throat, the kind that comes with age and bad heating systems. The house was silent, settled into that deep stillness of the early morning hours. I moved down the hallway, my footsteps practiced, and light a habit from years of field work that never really leaves you. Light spilling out of the kitchen cut a sharp yellow angle across the floorboards. I found Nadia slumped over the walnut dining table, her head resting on her folded arms, her breathing shallow and uneven. She looked thin, too thin. The vibrant crown of curls she used to wear was scraped back into a fraying, messy bun. Blueprint sketches and long, cold coffee cups were scattered all around her. She was working herself into an early grave. I knew the pressure she was under. Her firm was competing for the Skyline project, a massive skyscraper contract that would define the Houston skyline for the next century. The kind of project that made careers, the kind that also broke people. I moved to switch off the lamp, but my eyes landed on her phone. It was plugged into her laptop, the screen still awake, open to her email outbox. The subject line read, "Final Skyline, Blueprints Complete, Structural Analysis." I assumed the recipient would be her boss or the firm's submission portal. The name in that field was Derek Foxwell, her husband, my son-in-law. The timestamp read 1:55 a.m., 5 minutes earlier. I leaned in without my glasses squinting to read the body of the message. "Derek, I finished the structural load adjustments you asked for. I am sending this to your private email so you can format it for the presentation tomorrow. Please do not forget to add my name to the title slide this time. I am so tired I can barely see. Love you." My hand hovered above the phone. Why would she need to route her own work through her husband's private email for formatting? She was the architect. He was a project manager. Design was not his domain. He handled schedules. Something was wrong. The kitchen air felt suddenly thick. Next to Nadia's phone, Derek's tablet sat on a charging stand. It buzzed one short vibration that rang out loud in the silence. The screen lit up. A text from an unsaved number. Did the idiot send it yet? I stared at those 5 words. The idiot. He was talking about my daughter. My Nadia. The woman who graduated top of her class, who could run load-bearing calculations in her head while he was still figuring out how to knot his tie. A surge of rage rose hot and blinding, and I pushed it back down. Rage is useless. Rage makes you sloppy. I needed to be cold. I needed to be the auditor again. I looked at Nadia sleeping so peacefully with no idea she was being gutted by the one person she trusted most. Carefully, I reached out and took her phone. I forwarded the email to an encrypted server I had kept active since retiring. Then I used my own phone to photograph the text on Derek's tablet, making sure the timestamp and the sender's number were both in frame. I needed more. One suspicious text was not proof of a conspiracy. I needed to know who was on the other end of that number and exactly what they were planning. I moved to Derek's laptop closed on the kitchen island. I opened it, password protected of course, but Derek was arrogant and arrogant men are predictable. He had been using the same 6-digit code for the alarm, the garage door, and his phone for 2 years. I typed in his own birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. narcissist. I did not have much time. If he woke up, if he came downstairs for water, if he heard anything at all, this whole operation would be blown. He would spin a story, gaslight Nadia, and shut me out for good. I needed a permanent window into everything he did. I reached into the pocket of my robe. I always carried a small, high-capacity flash drive on my keychain, a habit left over from the bureau. On it was a piece of software I had written myself years ago, a keystroke logger. It was a ghost program. Once installed, it would run invisibly in the background, hidden from the task manager, hidden from antivirus software, capturing every key he pressed, every password, every draft, email, every deleted message, every search. I inserted the drive. The computer chimed softly and I froze, eyes going to the ceiling. The floorboards in the master bedroom shifted. A heavy footstep. Then another. He was awake. My heart hammered against my ribs in a way I had not felt since a raid in Dallas in '99. I forced my hands steady. The install bar crawled across the screen. 20%. 40%. The bedroom door opened upstairs, hinges that needed oiling. I made a mental note to never oil them. That squeak was my early warning system. 60%. The footsteps reached the hallway, moving toward the stairs. Come on, come on. I willed the software to move faster. 80%. The heavy rhythmic thud of Derek on the stairs. He walked like a man who owned the world. He was halfway down. 99%. Done. I yanked the drive free and shoved it into my pocket. I shut the laptop lid just as his shadow stretched across the kitchen floor. I stepped back fast, moving toward the refrigerator, grabbing a water pitcher, playing the part of a man who had just wandered in. Derek stepped into the light. He was wearing a cashmere robe that probably cost more than my first car. He looked well-rested, skin, smooth hair, barely disturbed. He spotted me, and for just a moment his eyes narrowed. A flash of annoyance, a flash of suspicion. Then it was gone, swallowed by a smooth, practiced smile. "Clifton," he said, dropping his voice to a theatrical whisper. "You are up late. Is everything okay?" I poured water into a glass, letting my hand tremble slightly. I let it happen. It fit the character. Just thirsty Derek, old pipes drying out. I gestured loosely at my throat. He nodded and dismissed me as a threat, without a second thought. Then he turned his attention to Nadia. The transformation was sickening to watch. He crossed to her, his face reshaping itself into an expression of concern. He lifted the blanket I had tucked around her and adjusted it, smoothing her hair. "Poor girl," he murmured, just loud enough to carry. "She works too hard. I keep telling her to slow down, but she is just so obsessive." He bent and kissed the top of her head. It looked like love, but I was watching his eyes. They were not on her at all. They were on the laptop I had just closed. He was checking whether it had been moved. He was checking the position of his tablet. He was calculating. "You should get back to bed, Clifton," he said, turning to me with a smile that stopped well short of his eyes. "I will carry her upstairs. She needs her rest. Tomorrow is a big day for her." "For us," I said, keeping my voice thin and raspy. "For the family." He let out a dry, soundless chuckle. "Right, for the family. Good night, Clifton." I shuffled out of the kitchen, playing the tired old man, dragging my slippers across the floor. I took the stairs, slowly gripping the railing with both hands. I felt his gaze on my back the entire way, until I turned the corner. The moment my door clicked shut, the act fell away. I stood straight. I exhaled slowly, letting the burning rage drain out of my chest. I sat at my desk and opened my own secure laptop. I pulled up the remote dashboard for the software I had just installed. The connection came up immediately. The status light turned green. Ghost is active. Downstairs, I heard Derek moving around. I heard the click of his laptop opening. On my screen, a stream of text began appearing in real time. He was typing. I watched the letters build into words one by one. He was replying to the text from the unknown number. "Got the file." The old man was wandering around, but he is too senile to notice anything. "I am deleting her name from the file now. By tomorrow noon, the Skyline project will be mine, and she will be having a breakdown." I stared at those words on the screen. The confirmation was total. This was not just theft. This was a demolition. He planned to shatter her mind and walk off with her genius. Then another message came through from the unknown number. "Good. Make sure she takes the pills in the morning. We need her confused during the board meeting. If she tries to speak, she needs to sound crazy." I sat back in my chair, the monitor's glow painting my face in the darkness. My hands, which had been unsteady downstairs, were now completely still. They wanted to make her sound unhinged. They wanted to gut her life's work and walk away with it. And they thought they were dealing with an exhausted wife and a senile old gardener. I checked the time. It was 2:15 a.m. The board meeting was 8 hours away. They had a plan to destroy my daughter, but they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had let the auditor into the building, and I was not going to stand by and watch. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had not touched in 5 years. It rang once. "Yeah," said a gruff voice. "It is late, Clifton. This better be good." "It is not good," I replied, my voice dropping into the flat measured tone I used to save for interrogation rooms. "But it is going to be interesting. I need you to trace a number and get the van ready. We are going to work." The smell of fresh coffee usually means a new start, but that morning it was covering the stench of betrayal. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, catching the dust as it drifted through the air. To a stranger glancing in it would have looked like a peaceful domestic scene. My daughter Nadia sat at the island cradling a mug of black coffee, while her husband Derek buttered toast with the precision of a surgeon. But I knew better. I leaned in the doorway on my cane and watched the performance of a lifetime. Derek was not just eating breakfast. He was methodically dismantling my daughter's confidence piece by piece. The blueprints Nadia had worn herself out over the night before were spread on the counter between them. Derek tapped the paper with a manicured finger. His voice was low and smooth, like silk concealing a blade. "Nadia, honey, I do not know how to say this without upsetting you," he said, his face composing itself into a mask of pained concern. "I was up until 4 o'clock in the morning, correcting these load-bearing calculations. If I had submitted what you sent me last night, the board would have laughed us out of the room. You missed the structural integrity ratio by a factor of 3. Nadia folded inward. Her shoulders curved and she stared down into her coffee as if she wanted to disappear inside it. I watched her hands begin to shake. Those same hands had assembled intricate Lego structures at age 5 and produced award-winning designs at 25. Now they trembled with doubt he had planted there. "I checked it 3 times, Derek," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was sure the math was right." Derek let out a sigh, the sound of a patient parent managing a slow child. He reached across the counter and laid his hand over hers. "That is exactly the problem, babe. You are running on empty. You are not thinking straight. Remember last week when you could not find where you had parked? Remember when you left the stove on your mind as buckling under the pressure? You should be grateful I caught this before the partners laid eyes on it. I saved you from professional suicide." I gripped the head of my cane until my knuckles whitened. It was a lie. I had read the email. I knew her work was flawless. He was not saving her. He was persuading her she was broken so he could claim the wreckage. "Here," Derek said, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small amber prescription bottle. "I refilled your vitamins. You forgot to take them yesterday, that is why you were so scattered last night. Take 2. It will help you stay sharp for the presentation." He shook 2 small blue pills into his palm and extended them toward her. To any outside eye, it looked like a devoted husband caring for his stressed wife. To me, it looked like a man loading a weapon. Nadia took the pills without hesitating. She swallowed them with a mouthful of hot coffee. "Thank you, Derek," she murmured. "I do not know what I would do without you. I feel like I'm losing my grip lately." "You would be lost without me," Derek agreed, smiling with his mouth while his eyes stayed flat. "But I am here. I will always handle the hard stuff for you." I made myself shuffle into the room, dragging my left foot just enough to sell the role. "Good morning," I rasped, pitching my voice thin and reedy. "Any coffee left for an old man? I'll stay." Derek glanced up, and whatever warmth he had been projecting evaporated at once, replaced by a look of mild contempt. He checked his watch. "There is some in the pot, Clifton. Try not to spill it this time. The cleaning lady just came yesterday." I crossed to the coffee maker at a crawl. I needed to measure exactly how far his arrogance ran. "Big day today?" I asked, keeping my back to them. "Nadia is presenting that big building project, right? The Skyline thing. It is called the Skyline Initiative Clifton," Derek said sharply. "And no, Nadia is not presenting. We decided it is best if I take the lead. Nadia will be there for support." I turned around, arranging my face into a look of gentle bafflement. "But I thought Nadia drew up the plans. She spent the whole month in her office. I could hear her typing." Derek laughed. It came out as a short, harsh bark. "Drew the pictures, God, Clifton, you make it sound like she is in kindergarten with a box of crayons. Architecture is about vision and management things a bit beyond your understanding. Just worry about your gardenias and let the adults handle the business. I looked at Nadia, waiting for her to push back, waiting for her to say that I was a former FBI auditor who had put sharper men than him behind bars, waiting for her to remind him that she was the genius and he was just the suit. Instead, she looked up at me with glassy eyes. The pills were already working. "Dad, please," she said quietly. "Do not annoy Derek. He is under a lot of pressure fixing my mistakes. Just go sit in the garden." Okay. Those words landed harder than a physical blow. She was defending the parasite. He had warped her sense of reality so completely that she saw him as her rescuer and me as a nuisance. I looked at Derek. He was smirking. It was slight, just a small curl of the lip that said everything I won. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was nothing but a senile old man living off his goodwill. He stood buttoning his midnight blue power suit jacket. "I have to go to the office early to reformat these files," he said. He leaned down and kissed Nadia on the cheek. "Rest for another hour, babe. You look terrible. I will send a car for you at 10 o'clock. He grabbed his keys and the roll of blueprints. Walking past me, he did not even glance my way. He moved by as though I were a piece of furniture. I waited. I counted the seconds. I heard the front door open and shut. I heard the chirp of his luxury sedan unlocking. The engine growled to life and faded down the street. Only then did I drop the act. My back straightened. The shuffle was gone. I crossed to the window and watched his car vanish around the corner. Then I turned and looked at the amber bottle sitting on the counter. "Nadia," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Why do you not go lie down upstairs? The couch is more comfortable." She blinked at me, her expression loose and confused. Her speech was already beginning to slur. "Yeah, good idea, Dad. I am just so tired." "Oh." I guided her up the stairs, my heart breaking a little with every step as she leaned into me. I settled her into bed and pulled the shades against the morning light. "Sleep, Nadia," I whispered. "I will watch over the house." The moment her breathing slowed into a heavy, chemically induced rhythm, I moved. Back downstairs, straight to the kitchen counter. The amber bottle was exactly where he had left it. The label read, "Multivitamin Complex." It looked professional, legitimate. I opened it and tipped one blue pill into a tissue. I wrapped it with care, keeping it away from my skin. I could not afford to contaminate the sample. I tucked the tissue into my pocket and returned the bottle to exactly the spot it had been sitting. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I grabbed my car keys and drove to a small pharmacy on the south side of Houston, not a chain, a family-run place belonging to an old friend named Orrin. We had worked together on several narcotics cases back when the Bureau needed off-the-record chemical analysis. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. The store was empty. Orrin was behind the counter working through his inventory. He looked up and grinned, eyes widening behind thick glasses. "Clifton Beaufort," he said warmly. "Haven't laid eyes on you since the retirement party. What brings you in? The joint's giving you trouble? No pleasantries today, Orrin," I said, turning the lock on the door and flipping the sign to closed. "I need a favor, and I need it quickly." I drew the tissue from my pocket and set the blue pill on the glass counter. Orrin studied it, his smile fading as he read the look on my face. "What is this?" he asked, lifting it with a pair of tweezers. "My son-in-law has been giving this to my daughter," I said, my voice tight. "He calls it a vitamin. I do not believe him." Orrin's expression darkened. He turned and disappeared into his back lab. "Give me 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes stretched like 5 years. I moved up and down the narrow aisles past rows of cough syrup and aspirin, and I thought about Nadia, the fog behind her eyes, the trembling in her hands. If I was wrong, if this turned out to be nothing more than a vitamin, then I was a paranoid old man judging a lousy husband too harshly. But my gut told me I was not wrong. In 30 years, my gut had never been wrong. Orrin came back out. The smile was completely gone. He looked pale. "Clifton," he said, quietly resting both hands on the counter. "You need to get your daughter off these immediately. A hospital would not hurt either." "What is it?" I asked. "It is not a vitamin," Orrin said, his voice grim. "This is a high-dose benzodiazepine derivative. It is similar to triazolam, but mixed with a muscle relaxant, used for severe insomnia or pre-surgery sedation." What happens to someone who takes it every morning with coffee? I asked, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Orrin pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Confusion, memory loss, poor motor coordination, and if you take it while trying to work it, induces a state of high suggestibility. Essentially, it turns the brain to mush. You would struggle to recall your own name, let alone perform complex calculations. Long-term use risks permanent cognitive damage. The silence inside that pharmacy was absolute. Everything clicked into place with a sickening weight. The blueprint errors, the lost keys, the confusion. Nadia was not losing her mind. She was being chemically lobotomized. Derek was not just stealing her work. He was systematically dismantling her intellect so she could never fight back. He was erasing the brilliant woman I had raised and replacing her with a compliant shell. I thanked Orrin and stepped out into the bright Houston morning. The sun felt cold on my skin. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my hands. I stared at the photo of the pill on my phone. This was not just a troubled marriage. This was attempted murder of the soul. Derek Foxwell had declared war on my family. He thought he was playing a clever game. He thought he was the predator. But as I turned the key and felt that old cold hunter's focus settle back into my chest, I understood the mistake he had made. He forgot to look into the background of the gardener. And now the gardener was coming to pull him out by the roots. The wind off Galveston Bay bit through my coat as I stepped away from the pharmacy, but the chill deep in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. I had the pill. I had confirmation my daughter was being drugged. Now I needed to understand why. Crimes like this are rarely acts of passion. They are acts of calculation. In 30 years at the Bureau, I had learned one truth that never failed me: if you want to find the motive, follow the money. I drove directly to the downtown branch of Meridian Trust, the bank where Nadia and Derek held their joint accounts, and where I had established the trust for the house. The building was a tower of glass and steel, engineered to make you feel small. I walked in leaning on my cane, playing the bewildered senior citizen without missing a beat. The security guard barely registered me. I was furniture to them. I asked to see the branch manager. A young man named Draper came out to the lobby, sued a size too snug smile, a degree too polished. He knew me only as Nadia's elderly father, the one who occasionally came in to deposit a small pension check. He had no idea that 2 decades ago, I had led the investigation that kept this very bank from a money laundering indictment. "Mr. Beauford," he said, already checking his watch, "how can we help you today? If this is about a withdrawal, the tellers can take care of that. I need to see the full transaction history on the joint account and the mortgage line of credit," I said, keeping my voice low and even. Draper sighed, a sound soaked in condescension. "Sir, we have covered this before. You are listed as a trustee on the property deed, but you are not a primary account holder on the daily checking. I cannot pull private statements without Derek or Nadia present. Privacy regulations are clear." I glanced around the lobby. Busy. I stepped closer to him and let the frail old man fall away. My posture came up. My eyes held his. "Listen carefully, Draper. I know the structuring protocols this branch uses for high-value transfers. I know that one phone call to the regional oversight director, who happens to owe me a favor from the Enron days, would make him very curious about why this branch has been logging compliance overrides on my daughter's account." Draper blinked. The blood left his face. He looked at me then, and for the first time he saw what was standing behind the grandfather mask. "I want those statements," I said, my voice like gravel shifting under pressure. "Every dollar that moved in or out of that house over the last 6 months. I want to see it now in your office with the door shut." 5 minutes later, I was in his leather chair, staring at a screen that confirmed every fear I had carried through the night. It was a bloodbath. The savings account, which had held $50,000 of Nadia's hard-earned bonuses, was gutted, drained through a chain of transfers into a shell company in the Cayman Islands. But that was only the beginning. There was a second mortgage on the house, a home equity line of credit for $400,000 approved 3 weeks ago. I looked at the digital signature on the approval document. It read, Nadia Beauford. The timestamp showed a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. Nadia had been at a site visit in Oklahoma that day. I knew because I had taken her to the airport myself. Derek had forged her signature using her digital ID. "Where did this money go?" I asked, pointing at the screen. Draper was sweating now, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. "It was wired immediately to a cryptocurrency exchange. Once funds reach the blockchain, they are virtually untraceable, Mr. Beaufort. That money is gone. I leaned back and let the full weight of the betrayal settle over me. Derek had not just raided their savings. He had leveraged the house itself. He had stolen the equity I had gifted them. He was cashing out, stripping the copper from the walls before he set fire to the building. He intended to leave Nadia homeless, bankrupt, and broken. I printed everything. I thanked Draper, who looked like he might need a moment alone, and walked out. I had the what and the how. Now I needed the who. Men like Derek do not steal $500,000 to let it sit. They steal it to spend it, and they almost always spend it on someone. I opened the GPS tracker app on my phone. The keylogger was not the only thing I had planted. When I repaired his car's radiator the month before, I had pressed a magnetic tracker into the rear bumper. The dot on the map was pulsing. He was not at the office. He was at La Maison Dorée, a French bistro in the most expensive part of the city. I drove there hands steady on the wheel, the kind of place where a salad costs more than my weekly grocery bill. I parked down the block and approached on foot with my hat pulled low. Derek's car was easy to spot, sitting right out front in a valet space. Going inside was too risky. Instead, I circled around to the side of the building, where the patio was screened behind a tall hedge. Voices carried through the foliage. I moved along the hedge looking for an opening, and there he was. Derek sat at a corner table, laughing loose and comfortable, radiating the ease of a man who believed he had already won. Across from him was a woman, striking in a sharp, predatory way, blonde hair pulled back tight, designer sunglasses perched on her head, a suit that announced power before she said a word. I knew her the moment I saw her. Camille Langston. Her father owns Langston Building, the biggest competitor to Nadia's firm. This was not just an affair. This was corporate espionage. I reached up and adjusted the device in my left ear. Not a hearing aid, a high-gain sound amplifier I had held onto from my surveillance days. I dialed out the street noise and locked onto their table. Their voices came through clean and sharp as if I were seated right beside them. "Baby, you should have seen her this morning," Derek was saying, lifting his wine glass. She was a wreck, shaking so hard she could barely hold her coffee. I told her she was losing her mind and she thanked me for the help. Camille laughed a cold, brittle sound. "That is pathetic. And the files? Sent them to you last night," Derek said. "I pulled her name off everything. By the time I walk through that presentation tomorrow, everyone will believe it came from me. Your father is ready to bring me on, right?" "The moment you deliver the contract," Camille said, reaching across to run her fingers over his hand. "Dad promised you the VP seat and the signing bonus." "What about the money from the house?" Derek asked, dropping his voice. "It is safe," Camille said. "Converted to Bitcoin and sitting in a cold wallet. We can pull it the moment we land in Rio." A wave of nausea rolled through me. They were going to run. They planned to let Nadia collapse at the presentation strip, her career strip her home, and disappear to South America with her money. "What about the divorce?" Derek asked. "If she fights it, she could freeze the accounts." Camille smirked. "She will not fight anything, Derek. By tomorrow afternoon, she will be in a psychiatric hold. You said you were handling it." I went still. I pressed the amplifier harder against my ear. "I am," Derek said. "I increased the dosage this morning. Long-term use causes confusion, but high doses bring on hallucinations and paranoia." I watched through the leaves as Derek swirled his wine, studying the glass with a kind of detached amusement. "She took 2 pills this morning," he continued. "I crushed another one into her dinner for tonight. I only need to give her 3 more doses before tomorrow morning. By the time she walks into that boardroom, she will not be able to put a coherent sentence together. She will be barely functional. The board will have no choice but to pull her and hand the project over to me." I stepped back from the hedge pulse hammering in my ears. This was not greed alone. It was not simple theft. It was a calculated medical assault on a human being. 3 more doses. He was planning to overdose her to push her mind past the breaking point, purely to guarantee his victory. I checked the time. Early afternoon. Nadia was at home, most likely sleeping off the morning dose. Derek would be back in a few hours to deliver the next one. I walked back to my car. I was done gathering evidence, done watching. The auditor had finished his report. Now it was time for the enforcer to take over. I had enough to put him away for 20 years, but prison felt too clean for him. I wanted to ruin him. I wanted him to walk into that boardroom as a king and be carried out in handcuffs. I started the engine. The growl of it matched the fury building in my chest. I was going home to make dinner, and I had a very particular recipe in mind for my son-in-law. 3 more doses, he had said. Well, 2 could play at that. And I knew exactly what was in that bottle now. I pulled into traffic, cutting off a taxi. I did not care. The shuffling old man was gone. The father was on a warpath. And Derek Foxwell had no idea that the prey he was hunting was actually the bait in a trap that was about to close around his throat. The chandeliers of the Lancaster Hotel ballroom blazed overhead like cold, unfeeling eyes watching a tragedy take shape. The annual gala for the Architecture Guild of Houston was the event of the season, a room packed with Ego's expensive suits and the sharp scent of ambition. And right in the center of it all stood my son-in-law, Derek Foxwell, gleaming like a newly minted coin. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that fit without a wrinkle. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who believed he owned the floor, shaking hands, laughing on cue, deploying that charming smile that had fooled everyone, including my daughter. Beside him was Nadia. My chest tightened just looking at her. The brilliant woman who had designed half the buildings in this portfolio looked like a ghost drifting through her own life. The heavy sedative Derek had slipped into her coffee that morning was doing its work. Her skin was pale, almost gray against the sapphire evening gown that hung loose on her frame. She had dropped 10 pounds in 2 weeks. Her hair, normally styled to precision, had gone slightly frizzy, a stray curl falling across her forehead that she kept brushing aside with a trembling hand. I trailed a few paces behind them, leaning on my cane, playing the part of the muddled elderly father brought along to a party he had no business attending. I watched how people looked at them. They looked at Derek with admiration. So young, so driven, so patient with his wife. Then they looked at Nadia with a mixture of pity and quiet judgment. Derek stopped to greet the chairman of the board, a man named Whitfield, who held the deciding vote on the Skyline project. "Derek, my boy," Whitfield said, landing a hand heavily on his shoulder. "Good to see you, and Nadia." Nadia blinked, trying to bring the moment into focus. "Hello, Mr. Whitfield," she said, but the words came out thick and slow, as if she had been drinking since noon. Whitfield's brow furrowed slightly, and Derek moved in, seamlessly sliding an arm around Nadia's waist. It looked like a steadying embrace. I saw his fingers press into her ribs. A warning. "Nadia has been struggling lately," Derek said, his voice soaked in counterfeit sympathy. "The pressure of the project has hit her health hard. We keep asking her to rest, but you know how dedicated she is." Whitfield nodded with a grave sincerity. "Of course. Mental health matters more than any project. You are a good man, Derek, standing by her through this." Nadia tried to push back. I am fine," she said, stumbling over it. The calculations." Derek cut her off with a laugh that landed like a fond, indulgent chuckle. "See what I mean? Still running numbers in her head. Honey, just breathe. I have taken care of everything." He was erasing her in plain sight, sketching the portrait of a woman on the edge of collapse and using her actual drug condition as his paint. I stood there with both hands on my cane, willing myself not to move against him. Not yet. I needed them to keep underestimating us until the very last second. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. Derek plucked 2 off and offered one to Nadia. "Here, babe, maybe this will help you settle," he said. I nearly lunged forward. Alcohol on top of benzodiazepines is a recipe for catastrophe. It would multiply her confusion tenfold, but I could not intervene without blowing my cover. Nadia took the glass, her hand shaking badly. We moved deeper into the room, into the wall of noise laughter, clinking crystal overlapping voices. I adjusted the amplifier in my ear, locking onto the frequency of the microphone I had pressed into Derek's lapel earlier that evening. I positioned myself nearby, fading into the background beside a large potted palm. Nadia was attempting to talk with a former colleague, a woman she had once mentored. "I saw the blueprints for the atrium," Nadia said, her voice unsteady. "The light refraction, it is wrong." The colleague's eyes slid past her to Derek, the way people do when they have already decided who in the room is worth listening to. "Is she all right, Derek?" Derek sighed and gave a slow, weary shake of his head. "We are adjusting her medication. It is a process. Honestly, it is like taking care of a child sometimes." And then it happened. The moment Derek had been engineering all night. Nadia turned too quickly, trying to face her colleague. Her coordination, wrecked by the drugs, failed her. Her heel snagged on the thick plush carpet. She lurched forward. Her arm shot out to catch herself. The champagne flute flew from her grip. Time seemed to slow. I watched the crystal glass spin through the air, catching the chandelier light before it came down hard on the pristine white tablecloth of the buffet table. Smash! That sound cut through the ballroom chatter like a gunshot. Red wine from a nearby decanter she'd also knocked over bled across the white linen, spreading like a fresh wound. The entire room went still. The music cut out. Hundreds of eyes swung toward Nadia. She stood there frozen, horrified, one hand pressed over her mouth. "I am sorry," she whimpered. "I am so sorry." Derek moved instantly, not to comfort her, to control the story. He rushed to her side and grabbed her by the shoulders, but instead of pulling her close, he gave her a slight shake, just enough to make her look unsteady to anyone watching. He leaned in toward her ear. To the room, it looked like whispered reassurance, but through my earpiece, his voice came through perfectly venomous and ice cold. "You are useless. You are an embarrassment to me. Look at everyone staring at you. They think you are a drunk. They think you are crazy. Why do you not just go die somewhere so I can finish this?" Nadia sobbed, her knees threatening to buckle. Derek glanced up at the crowd, his face arranged into an expression of tragic, long-suffering heroism. "I am so sorry, everyone," he announced, projecting to the back of the room. "My wife is not feeling well. Please excuse us." He flagged down a waiter. "Could you help my father-in-law get her to the car? I need to take care of this." The crowd murmured in sympathy. Poor Derek, saddled with such a wreck of a wife. I stepped forward, letting the shuffle back into my walk. "Come on, Nadia," I said, gently taking her arm. "Let us go." I guided her out, her whole body shaking with sobs. I handed her off to the valet outside, telling him to let her sit in the car with the heat running. I said I had to go back inside to use the restroom. I did not go to the restroom. I went hunting. I found Derek in the men's executive washroom, standing before the mirror working a speck of red wine off the cuff of his white tuxedo. He was humming. He was actually humming a cheerful little tune. The door swung shut behind me, leaving us alone in the tiled quiet. Derek spotted me in the mirror. He did not turn around. "Did you get her to the car, Clifton?" he asked. His tone was flat bored. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice rough and raspy. "She is crying, Derek. Says she feels sick." Derek laughed. "She is sick, all right? Sick in the head. And you know what, Clifton, after tonight I am done playing nurse." He turned around, settling back against the marble sink with his arms crossed. "The moment I lock in that contract tomorrow, everything changes. I am putting the house on the market next week." I blinked, playing at confusion. "But where will we live?" "We," Derek chuckled. "There is no we, old man. I am moving into a penthouse in the city. Nadia is going to a facility where they can manage her condition. And you?" He pushed off the sink and moved toward me, towering over my hunched frame. He jabbed me in the chest with one hard finger. "I found a place for you as well. It is called Meadow Glen, state-funded. Smells like urine and boiled cabbage, and the staff barely speaks English. But it is cheap, and that is exactly what you are worth to me. A cheap problem that needs to be filed away." He smirked, adjusting his bow tie. "Do not look so shocked. You have been living off my charity for 2 years. The ride is over. Pack your bags tonight, Clifton. Tomorrow you are garbage." He patted my cheek, a slow, humiliating tap. Then he turned and walked out of that bathroom, whistling the same happy tune. The heavy door swung shut. The silence came back. I stood there a long moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I slowly straightened my back. The curve in my spine disappeared. The tremor in my hand stopped dead. I rolled my neck and heard a satisfying crack as the tension let go. I crossed to the mirror. The man looking back at me was not a befuddled old gardener. The eyes were not cloudy with age. They were sharp, clear, burning, with a cold and focused fire. I reached into my pocket and produced a microfiber cloth. I wiped the spot on my cheek where he had touched me the way you'd wipe off a smear of dirt. I looked at my reflection. I straightened my tie, pulling the knot tight with precision. "You made a mistake, Derek," I said to the empty room, my voice low and steady. "You thought you were fighting a sheep. You did not check the teeth." I dropped the cloth in the trash. "You just signed your death warrant, son." I turned and walked out of that bathroom. Not a shuffle, a march. The time for watching was over. The operation had just entered the termination phase. The recordings were solid, but they were not enough. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks from my own house, staring out at a rain-slicked windshield. On the other end of the secure line was Vera Quinlan. Vera was not merely a lawyer, she was a shark. I had shaped myself back when she was a rookie legal analyst for the Bureau. Now she ran the most vicious litigation firm in Houston. Her voice came through the speaker, sharp and stripped of any sympathy. Clifton, the audio is compelling, but it is circumstantial. In civil court, Derek's lawyers will argue those recordings were obtained illegally. They will claim he was role-playing or that the context was manipulated. If we want to freeze his assets before the board meeting, and if we want a restraining order that actually holds, we need the source files. I gripped the steering wheel. I knew exactly what she was asking. I needed the digital footprint. I needed the metadata. He uses an iPad Pro, I said, watching the wipers slash back and forth across the glass. He runs everything through it, the transfers, the emails to Camille, the schematics he lifted from Nadia. It is all on there. Then get it, Vera said. I need you to clone the drive, but Clifton, there is a catch. If he has locked the drive with biometric security, we cannot crack it remotely, not in time. You need his fingerprint or his face. I looked down the street at the house. Dark. The predator sleeping in his den. He uses a fingerprint lock, I said, thinking of the way he'd pressed his thumb to the screen that morning. Then you know what needs to happen, Vera said. Call me once you have the data, and do not get caught, Clifton. If he wakes up and finds you in there, he will claim self-defense and shoot you. Honestly, with the laws in this state, he would probably walk away clean. I ended the call. Rain hammered the roof of the car, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest. I was 69 years old. My knees ached whenever it rained. My reflexes were not what they had been back in '95. But as I pulled the car back into the driveway and cut the engine, a cold calm settled over me like a second skin. This was not a break-in. This was an extraction, and the target was sleeping next to my daughter. I came in through the side door, which I had left unlocked. Inside, the air was warm and carried the scent of the eucalyptus diffuser Nadia used to keep her anxiety at bay. The silence pressed down heavy. I slipped off my shoes and moved in my socks. I climbed the stairs one at a time, counting each step in my head the way I used to when clearing a building. 1, 2, skip the third, it creaks. 4, 5. I reached the landing. The master bedroom door was open a crack. I could make out the rhythm of 2 separate sets of breathing, one slow and heavy. That was Derek, one shallow and chemically leveled out. That was Nadia. I eased the door open an inch at a time. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were perfectly still. I slipped into the room. The only light was the amber glow of the street lamp outside, filtering through sheer curtains and throwing long skeletal shadows across the floor. I moved toward Derek's side of the bed. He was sprawled on his back mouth, slightly open one arm dangling off the edge of the mattress. On the nightstand beside a glass of water sat the iPad. Right there, the key to saving my daughter's life. I reached out and picked it up, cold and sleek, heavier than it looked. I pressed the home button. The screen blazed to life, blindingly bright in the dark room. I twisted my body to shield the glow. Touch ID or enter passcode. I glanced at Derek. He was deep under, but sleep is a fragile thing. I needed his thumb. I needed to lift the hand of the man who was poisoning my child and press it against that glass screen without pulling him out of his sleep. I lowered myself to my knees beside the bed. The smell of him hit me hard. Expensive cologne and stale wine. I hated him so completely in that moment that my hands wanted to find his throat instead of his thumb. But I drove the rage back down. Rage is noise. I needed silence. I reached out and carefully, very carefully cradled his hand. His skin was warm, his fingers slack and loose. I isolated the thumb. I brought the iPad close, hovering at just millimeters above his skin. Then Derek shifted. I went stone still. I stopped breathing. I became part of the darkness. Derek groaned, rolling his head to one side. He smacked his lips and let out something incoherent. His hand twitched inside mine. If he pulled back now, if those eyes came open, everything was finished. He would see a shadow standing over him. He would go for the gun I knew he kept in the top drawer. I waited. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. His breathing settled back into a deep, even snore. He had not woken. I let the air out slowly through my nose. I brought the iPad back into position. This time, I moved without hesitation. I pressed the sensor against his thumb. Click. The screen unlocked. The grid of apps appeared. I was in. I did not allow myself any relief. I was still deep inside the lion's den. I rose slowly, stepping back from the bed and retreating toward the ensuite bathroom where I could work behind a closed door. I perched on the edge of the bathtub and pulled the high-speed flash drive from my pocket. I plugged it into the lightning port and launched the extraction protocol. The progress bar came up. Copying files. It moved with agonizing slowness. The sheer volume of data Derek had stored on this device was staggering. Photos, videos, encrypted chats, banking apps. The bar inched forward. 10%. 20. I checked my watch. 3:02 a.m. Out in the bedroom, Derek coughed. I went rigid, eyes locked on the crack of light beneath the bathroom door. Silence settled back. 50%. While the copy ran, I began moving through the file structure. I had to confirm I was pulling the right material. I found a folder named Skyline. Inside were Nadia's original drawings, but the metadata had been wiped clean and overwritten with Derek's author tag. A second folder was labeled Cayman. That was the money, 70%. Without warning, the iPad in my hands vibrated hard. I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with an incoming FaceTime call. The name on the screen read, Camille, followed by a heart emoji. A spike of panic went through me. 3 a.m. Why was she calling now? If the ringtone didn't rouse him, the vibration against a hard surface certainly would have, but the iPad was in my hands. The Bluetooth link, though, was still live. Out on the nightstand, Derek's Apple Watch began to buzz and chime, in sync with the call. Ping, ping, ping. I heard the bed springs give. Derek groaned louder this time. What the hell? He muttered, still half asleep. I fixed my eyes on the progress bar. 90%. I couldn't cancel the call declining. It would push a notification straight to the iPad screen. I had to let it ring through. Derek was fumbling across the nightstand. I heard his palm hitting the wood. Where is it? He muttered. He was searching for the iPad, his hand sweeping over the empty space where it should have been. 95%. I yanked the flash drive free. No time for a safe removal prompt. I killed the screen and held my breath. Derek was sitting up now. I could hear the sheets rustling. Babe, he hissed. Babe, are you calling me? Nadia murmured something from her drugged sleep. Derek swore under his breath. He found his watch and silenced the call. Then he reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room and leaked under the bathroom door. If he needed the toilet, if he swung his legs out and walked this way, I was cornered. I tightened my grip on the cane, ready to use it. I was too old for a fair fight. If he came through that door, I was taking his knees out first. But he did not get up. He was hunting for the iPad. Must have left it downstairs, he muttered to himself. Idiot. He exhaled heavily and snapped the light back off. He dropped back against the pillow. I stood in the dark bathroom for a full 5 minutes, the iPad pressed to my chest. When his snoring kicked back in, I moved. I set the iPad down on the nightstand, precisely where it had been sitting. Then I ghosted out of the room, down the stairs, and through the door into the cool night outside. My hands were trembling now. The adrenaline was crashing through me in waves. I sat in my car and plugged the flash drive into my own laptop to check what I had. Everything was there. The theft, the fraud, the affair. But then I found a folder I had missed in the scramble. It was buried deep in the system, nested inside a directory marked Miscellaneous Expenses. The folder was called simply Plan B. My blood went cold. I opened it. Inside, photographs of my car, my vintage Camaro sitting in the garage. Schematics of the brake lines. Screenshots of a conversation with a mechanic named Blade, whose specialty was making accidents indistinguishable from mechanical failures. And a text message draft from Derek to Camille dated 2 days ago. If the old man does not agree to the nursing home, we go with Plan B. Blade says he can cut the line so it snaps only when he hits highway speeds. It will be quick, a tragic accident for a tragic old man. I stared at the screen. The rain was coming down harder against the roof, now sealing me inside a bubble of horror. He was not merely planning to lock me away, he was planning to kill me. He had already put down a deposit. I looked up at the darkened window of the master bedroom. I felt something wet track down my cheek, but it was not fear doing that. It was a realization so sharp it cut straight through me. He wanted me gone because I was the only thing standing between him and everything he wanted. I closed the laptop. I wiped my face. You want a war? Derek, I whispered to the dark house. You want to cut my brakes. I turned the key in the ignition. You just cut your own throat, because now I am not just fighting for my daughter's money. I am fighting for our lives, and I do not take prisoners. The sound of a zipper closing usually signals a journey. This time, it felt like a surrender. I packed my life into 2 worn canvas duffel bags. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting my hands shake as I folded my shirts. I needed to sell every second of this performance. I needed Derek to believe he had won, that he had ground the old man's spirit down to dust. I took a long look around the guest room that had been my refuge for the past 2 years. I left certain things behind on purpose. A book on the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses sitting on the dresser, evidence of a hurried exit, signs of an old man too muddled to pack what mattered. I dragged the bags to the top of the stairs. The wheels knocked against the wood in a steady rhythm that carried through the silent house. Down in the foyer they were waiting. The scene had the feel of a tableau from a funeral. Nadia was sitting on the bottom step, face buried in her hands, crying softly. Derek stood by the front door with his eyes on his watch. He was wearing his serious face, the expression he deployed when he was letting someone go. But I could read him now. I could see the tension pulling at his jaw, not grief, but the effort of holding back a grin. I stopped halfway down the stairs, breathing hard. I let my shoulders cave. I made myself smaller. I became exactly what he had called me, a burden. "I am ready, Derek," I said, letting my voice crack just enough. "The taxi is outside." Nadia looked up. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, and glassy from the drugs still in her system. She tried to get to her feet and stumbled. "Dad, no," she sobbed, grabbing for the banister. "You do not have to go. This is your home, too. We can work something out. Derek, please do not make him leave." Derek moved to her and laid a hand on her shoulder. It looked like comfort, but I watched his knuckles go white. "We talked about this, honey," he said, his voice coated in false warmth. "It is for his own safety. He is forgetting things. He keeps leaving the stove on. Meadow Glen has trained staff around the clock. We cannot offer that level of care here. We have the Skyline presentation tomorrow. We have to be realistic." "Realistic," Nadia wept, pressing her face into his chest. "It feels cruel." "It is kindness," Derek insisted, stroking her hair, while his eyes stayed locked on mine. Dead shark eyes, cold and flat beneath the surface. "It is the most loving thing we can do for him. Is that not right, Clifton?" I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. Every part of me wanted to hurl it straight at him, wanted to come down those stairs and put my fist through his nose, but I swallowed it. Let it burn. Let it feed the plan. "You are right, Derek," I said, dropping my chin. "I am just in the way here. I do not want to be a burden to Nadia any longer. She needs to focus on her work. She does not need to spend her energy worrying about a senile old man." Derek nodded, slowly, solemn, and savoring every second of his victory. "I appreciate you being so reasonable about this, Clifton. I genuinely do. I have already covered the first month of the facility. The driver has his instructions." He grabbed my bags. He was eager, practically glowing with it. He wanted me out the door before I could reconsider. He carried them to the curb with a bounce in his step. I descended the stairs one deliberate step at a time. The moment I reached the bottom, Nadia threw her arms around me. She was shaking hard. She felt so thin in my embrace, like a bird with broken wings. This was the worst of it, leaving her here alone with the wolf, even for an hour, even for a single day. Every paternal instinct I had screamed against it, but I had to hold to the plan. I had to trust her. I pulled her in tight. I turned her so her face was hidden from Derek, who was already outside talking to the taxi driver. 10 seconds. That was all I had. 10 seconds to start cutting through the fog he had built around her mind. 10 seconds to save her life. And then I brought my lips down to her ear. I let the voice change. The frail old man rasp disappeared. In its place came the clear, steady authority of the agent she had known since she was a little girl. "Listen to me, Nadia," I whispered fast and low. "Do not react. Keep crying. Just listen." She went rigid in my arms, but she held on. "I am not walking away from you," I breathed. "This is a setup. I am laying a trap for him." "Dad," she managed, her voice barely audible through the trembling. I gripped her shoulders. "The blue pills are poison, Nadia. He is drugging you. Stop taking them. I swapped out the ones in your travel case for sugar pills. Take those. You need to be sharp tomorrow." She started to draw back to look at me, and I held her where she was. "Do not look at me," I said quietly. "Trust me. Do you remember our code word from when you were small? What we said when you were scared of the thunder? Protocol Bluebird." She breathed, the memory surfacing through the chemical haze. Protocol Bluebird, I confirmed. Stay safe until backup arrives. I will have eyes on you, every second. Now cry. Cry loud enough that he hears you. I let her go. Nadia broke into a sob that was half genuine heartbreak and half pure performance. She turned away from the door, burying her face in her hands. I love you, sweetheart. I said clearly, loud enough for Derek to catch every word. Be a good girl for your husband. I walked out. The morning air was sharp and cool. Derek was holding the taxi door open with the expression of a man who had just cashed a winning ticket. Take care of yourself, Clifton, he said, extending his hand. I left it there. You take care of her, Derek, I said, holding his gaze for one long moment. She is all I have. Not to worry. He smiled and shut the door. She is in very good hands. The taxi pulled out from the curb. Through the rear window, I watched Derek standing on the sidewalk. He did not wave. The second we rounded the corner, his phone was already out. He was not calling Nadia to check on her. He was making the call he had been saving for months. Driver, pull over right here, I said once the house was out of sight. Sir, the facility is across town, the driver said, looking uncertain. I pressed a $100 bill into his hand. Change of plans? Drop me at that black van on the corner of Elm and 4th. I climbed out, hauling my bags to the nondescript black utility van, sitting in the shade of a large oak. It looked like a plumber's rig, dirty, ordinary, the kind of vehicle nobody looks at twice. I unlocked the rear doors and stepped inside. It was not a plumber's van. It was a mobile command center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, their screens glowing with a low electronic hum. I dropped into the swivel chair, pulled on my headset, and went to work on the keyboard. The screens came up one by one. Camera 1, living room. Camera 2, kitchen. Camera 3, master bedroom. I was back inside the house. I watched Derek come through the front door. He did not stop to check on Nadia, who was still sitting on the stairs in tears. He walked straight past her to the kitchen, pulled a bottle of champagne from the refrigerator, and popped the cork. The sound cracked through my audio feed like a gunshot. Then he reached for his phone. I synced the audio. Hello, gorgeous, he said, his voice filling my headset. It is done. The trash has been taken out. Come over. We are celebrating. He hung up. He crossed to the front door and pulled it open again, not to let anyone out this time. A work van rolled into the driveway. A man in blue coveralls climbed out carrying a drill. A locksmith. Changing the locks on the spot. Making sure my key would never turn in that door again. Sealing the tomb. Deadbolts on the front and back, Derek told him. I want them done now. Money is not an issue. I sat in the dark van, the pale blue light of the monitors catching my face. I unscrewed a thermos of black coffee and took a slow sip. Go right ahead, Derek, I murmured, watching him pour himself a glass. Lock every door, bolt every window, dig yourself a moat if that makes you feel safe. On the screen, Nadia stood up from the stairs. She dried her eyes. She looked directly at the camera concealed inside the smoke detector. For just a heartbeat, she gave a single small nod. So slight no one else would have caught it. Then she turned and climbed the stairs, not stumbling, not dragging her feet, but moving with quiet purpose. She had heard me. Protocol Bluebird was active. 20 minutes later, a white convertible swung into the driveway. Camille stepped out looking like a film star, trench coat, stilettos, not a hair out of place. She walked into my house, as though she held the deed. Derek met her in the doorway and pulled her into a kiss that was obscene in its openness right there in the foyer, where Nadia's tears had not yet dried on the floor. Finally, Camille laughed, tossing her coat onto the chair where I used to read the morning paper. I thought that old fossil would never leave. He is gone, baby, Derek said, pressing a glass into her hand. Rotting away in a state home by now, and tomorrow the company is ours. They clinked glasses. I leaned in and bumped up the gain on the microphone. I watched them drink to their victory. I watched them drink to my end. Enjoy the champagne, I said quietly to the screen, my finger resting on the record button. Because it is the last thing you will ever taste as free people. I settled back into the chair. The night was young, the coffee was still hot, and I had the best seat in the house for the collapse of their entire world. I was not going anywhere. I was just getting started. The glow of the monitors was the only light inside that cramped surveillance van, but it might as well have been the fires of hell burning in front of me. Parked 2 streets over, watching the live feed from my own living room. Pure, calculated torture. Inside the house, Derek was pacing the length of the room while Nadia sat curled on the sofa with her knees pulled to her chest. She looked small. She looked hollowed out. The sugar pills I had substituted were keeping her body safe from whatever he was feeding her, but they could not shield her mind from the venom he was pouring into her ears. He stopped pacing and crouched down, getting right in her face. Through the high-definition audio feed, his voice came through crisp and utterly without warmth. "You know why he really left, don't you?" Derek said, his tone almost gentle. "You think he went to a nursing home because he is sick. That is not the truth, Nadia. He left because he cannot stand to look at you anymore." Nadia shook her head, pressing her face into her hands. "That is not true," she sobbed. "He loves me." "Does he—" What I was about to learn in that van would cut deeper than anything I had prepared for. Not just what was being done to Nadia, but the full weight of how far this man was willing to go. If you discovered that someone close to your family had been quietly working against you for years, would you act immediately, or would you wait until every piece of proof was in your hands? Derek asked, his voice thick with counterfeit sympathy. "Just like he loved your mother." I froze inside the van. My hand clamped down on the edge of the console so hard the plastic groaned. "Do not go there, Derek. Do not you dare speak her name." Derek pressed on, relentless. "You were too young to know the details, Nadia, but I read the police reports. I went through the hospital records. Your mother did not simply die of a heart attack. She died because she was alone. She called your father 3 times the night, 3 times Nadia. Do you know where he was?" Nadia was rocking now, both hands pressed over her ears. "Stop it, Derek. Please just stop." He was working. Derek snapped, pulling her hands away. He was off chasing some embezzlement case in Dallas. He ignored every one of her calls. He chose the job over his wife. And by the time he walked through that door, she was already gone. He let her die, Nadia. And now he is leaving you the same way. Because that is what he does. He abandons the women who need him most. A raw, primal sound tore out of me and filled the van. It was a lie. A twisted sliver of truth reshaped into a weapon. Celeste had called me, yes, but I was on a plane. I was flying home to surprise her for our anniversary. By the time the wheels touched down, she was gone. It was the deepest wound of my life, a guilt I carried every single day. And watching this man, this predator, take my grief and use it to cut the cord between me and my daughter was almost more than I could stand. I watched Nadia on the screen. Something inside her gave way. Her shoulders dropped. The crying stopped, replaced by a silence that was far more frightening. Her eyes drifted to the coffee table, where the pill bottle sat. "You are right," she whispered, her voice hollowed out. "I am just a burden, just like Mom was." Derek straightened up and tugged at his cuffs. He looked at her with flat, clinical indifference. "Take your medicine, Nadia. It will help you sleep. Maybe when you wake up, the pain will not feel so heavy." He turned and walked into the kitchen, leaving her alone with the bottle. This was the breaking point. I watched in horror as Nadia reached out. Her hand was shaking. She picked up the amber bottle. She did not tap out 2 pills. She poured a handful, then another. She emptied the entire contents onto the table, a small mountain of blue capsules. My heart stopped cold. I had swapped the pills in her travel case, yes, but was this that bottle? Or had Derek brought a fresh one from the pharmacy? Even if they were sugar pills, that volume could choke her. And the intent? God, the intent. My daughter was trying to erase herself because she believed she was unworthy of love. I had to move. I grabbed the van door handle. I could be at that front door in 3 minutes. I could kick it off its hinges and fold her into my arms. I could tell her everything. But if I did that, Derek would win. He would twist the story. He would say I broke in, say I was violent and unstable. He would have me arrested, and he would still hold power of attorney over Nadia. He would bury her in a facility where I could never reach her again. I held there, hand shaking on the latch. The war inside me was physical. Every instinct screamed, go to her. Every year of training screamed, hold the line. Nadia scooped up a handful of pills. She raised them toward her mouth. I cannot run in, but I can reach her another way. I spun back to the console. I pulled up the interface for the smart home system. Years ago, I had wired hidden speakers into the living room vents, part of a security installation I had never mentioned to anyone. I routed my microphone through voice modulation software. Deep, distorted, unrecognizable. I pulled the headset on. "Nadia," I said, letting the voice roll through the walls of the house like something larger than a man. On the screen, Nadia lurched. The pills flew from her hand and scattered across the floor. She spun in place, eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Who is there?" she breathed. I kept my voice level and commanding. "Put the bottle down, Nadia." She stood up, turning in a slow circle. Is this God?" "I am the one watching over you," I said. "You are not a burden, you are a fighter. The man in that kitchen is a liar. Do not let him win. Do not let him erase you." Nadia was trembling, staring up at the ceiling. "But he said my dad—" "Your father loves you more than his own life," I said, squeezing every trace of emotion out of my voice. "He is fighting for you at this very moment, but you have to fight too. Protocol, Bluebird Nadia. Remember the Bluebird." Nadia went still. The code word. The anchor I had pressed into her hand. I saw recognition break through her eyes, cutting through the chemical fog and the grief. She looked at the pills scattered across the floor. Then she looked toward the kitchen door. Derek was oblivious to the noise of the ice maker swallowing every sound from the vents. She swept the remaining pills off the table in one motion. She stood up taller. "Bluebird," she whispered. "Go to your room," I told her. "Lock the door. Do not come out until sunrise." Nadia nodded. She did not ask a single question. She snatched her blueprints and held them against her chest like a shield, then ran up the stairs. I dropped back in the chair and tore the headset off. My shirt was drenched. I glanced at the heart rate monitor on my watch. 140. I breathed deliberately, forcing my pulse back down. She was safe. Tonight she was safe. But the war was far from finished. On the kitchen camera, Derek was on his phone. He had not heard a thing from the vents. He was pouring a drink and leaning against the counter with the loose, satisfied posture of a man who believed everything was going exactly to plan. He was talking to Camille. I pushed the volume on the parabolic microphone. "She is cracking," Derek said, swirling his scotch. "I brought up her mother. Hit the mark perfectly. She's out there right now staring at that pill bottle. I give her 10 minutes before she swallows the lot." And he went quiet, listening to Camille. "No, I do not feel bad," he laughed. "Why would I? Do you know who her father actually is?" "Camille." I pressed closer to the screen. What did he know? "His name is not just Clifton Beaufort," Derek said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. 30 years ago, he went by Agent Beaufort. He was the lead auditor on the RICO case against the Foxwell Construction Group. My blood drained cold. The Foxwell case. One of the defining busts of my entire career. We dismantled a corrupt development firm that was laundering cartel money. The man at the top was Gerald Foxwell. He died in federal prison 3 years into his sentence. "That was my father," Derek said, biting out the words. "Clifton Beaufort put my father in a cage like an animal. He wiped out my family. He took our house, our money, everything we had. I grew up in a trailer park because of him." I stared at the screen, the breath gone out of me. Derek Foxwell. Gerald Foxwell. The thread had been running right through the middle of everything, and I had never pulled it. I had been so consumed with protecting Nadia's future that I had completely missed the vendetta beneath it all. This was never purely about greed. This was revenge. Patient, methodical years in the making revenge. He wanted to do to my family precisely what I had done to his strip away the house, the money, the child. So no, I do not feel bad. Derek went on, his eyes black with old hatred. I want him to suffer. I want him sitting by the phone tomorrow morning when the call comes telling him his daughter is dead. I want him to feel exactly what I felt watching them drag my father away in handcuffs. He poured another glass and let his gaze drift up toward the ceiling, toward the room where Nadia was hiding. "Tomorrow is the presentation," he said. "I take credit for the Skyline project. I lock in the bonus. And then, once the money clears," he paused and a slow, cruel smile pulled at his mouth. "If she does not finish the job tonight, I will finish it for her. The car is ready. The mechanic has already worked the brake line, loosened it just enough. After the presentation, I will tell her to drive herself home. She will never make it past the highway curve. I will ease her right off the edge of the world, just like her daddy pushed my father." He lifted his glass toward the empty kitchen. "To justice," he whispered. I sat in the dark van staring at the man who intended to murder my daughter. The last piece had finally locked into place. He was not simply a greedy husband. He was a monster shaped by my own history. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old service pistol. I checked the magazine. It was full. "You want justice, Derek?" I said to the screen, my voice quiet and dangerous. I slid the weapon back into the holster. "You have no idea what justice actually looks like. But tomorrow, when you walk into that boardroom, you are going to get your education. And this time, I am not carrying handcuffs. I am bringing the whole damn building down on top of you. The boardroom on the 45th floor of Whitfield Tower was built to make you feel insignificant. Floor-to-ceiling glass on every wall, a sweeping panoramic view of the Houston skyline that my daughter was born to transform. At the center of the room stretched a walnut dining table long enough to land a small aircraft on. Arranged around it sat 12 of the most powerful real estate figures in the region, men and women who could end a career or launch one with a single stroke of a pen. And standing at the head of the table, working the room like a preacher at a revival, was Derek Foxwell. I watched the live feed from the camera inside the smoke detector. The image was sharp and clean. I could see the perspiration on Derek's forehead, not from nerves, but from the pure exhilaration of running a theft. He looked flawless. His navy suit was cut to perfection, hair swept back, a laser pointer in one hand, clicking through slides with the other. This structure is not simply a building, Derek said, his voice smooth and radiating authority. It is a living system. The load-bearing truss design I developed allows for an open-air atrium on the 30th floor that defies conventional gravity. It is a revolution in vertical living. I pressed my hand flat against the edge of the console inside the surveillance van. I developed. He said it without a single tremor. He was claiming the sleepless nights Nadia had spent, calculating wind shear as his own. He was stealing the genius that ran in her blood. The chairman, Mr. Whitfield, leaned forward and rested his chin on one hand. He looked genuinely impressed. Remarkable, Whitfield said. The structural integrity calculations for that atrium must have been a nightmare. How did you solve the vibration problem from the L train tracks underneath? Derek didn't miss a beat. He flashed an easy, confident smile. It called for a specialized dampening system in the foundation hydraulic counterweights. The solution came to me in a dream, actually. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sketched it out on a napkin. Liar. You were unconscious at 3 o'clock in the morning, while Nadia was weeping over her drafting table. Whitfield turned to the board with a nod. This is precisely the kind of innovation we have been looking for. Bold. Fresh. I believe we have found our lead architect. A murmur of agreement moved through the room. Camille, seated in the back row, as a consultant, lit up with satisfaction. She sent Derek a small thumbs up. They thought they had crossed the finish line. They thought it was over. They thought Nadia was dead or unconscious somewhere on the shoulder of a highway. I checked the time on my monitor. 10 a.m. Central. Exactly. Showtime. I pressed the button on the walkie-talkie. Bluebird is a go. On the screen, the heavy double doors at the rear of the boardroom began to move. Not thrown open, eased open, deliberately, slowly. The sound of the oak panels dragging across the carpet was enough to turn a few heads. But when the figure stepped through into the light, every voice in that room died at once. It was Nadia, but not the Nadia they had witnessed at the gala, not the fragile, medicated woman who could barely stay on her feet. This was something else entirely. A resurrection. She wore a midnight blue power suit that fit her like a second skin, like armor. Her hair was drawn back in a sharp, severe ponytail that put every angle of her face on display. No jewelry, no bag. She moved down the length of that room with the cold, composed certainty of a queen who had come to take back what was hers. Derek stopped mid-sentence. The laser pointer quivered in his grip, throwing the red dot erratically across the screen like a panicked insect. The color drained from his face. He stared at her, the way a man stares at something that should not be standing. His mouth opened and shut without producing a single word. Nadia walked the full length of the table. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic strike of her heels against the floor. Click, 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 a countdown. She did not glance at the board members. She did not look at Camille. Her eyes stayed on Derek and only Derek. Whitfield rose from his chair, visibly confused. We were not expecting you. Mr. Foxwell said you were unwell. He told us you were in the hospital. Nadia halted 3 feet from Derek. She stood toe-to-toe with him. She was shorter by several inches, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the entire room. I am feeling considerably better, Mr. Whitfield, Nadia said, her voice steady and unhurried. The medication my husband had been administering carried some rather serious side effects. Once I stopped taking it, my mind cleared up remarkably fast. Derek found his voice. It came out thin and high right at the edge of panic. Nadia, what are you doing here? You need to be resting. You are not yourself. You are having an episode. He pivoted to the board, a strained smile stretched across his face. Please forgive the interruption. She is not in her right mind. I tried to shield her from the stress, but she slipped away from her caregivers. I need to call security. His hand went for his phone. Don't bother, Nadia said. Security is already present. She tilted her head toward the back of the room. The doors opened a second time. Not security guards. 2 men in dark suits, my former colleagues from the fraud division. They took up positions by the door arms, folded, saying nothing. Derek looked cornered. A nervous, forced laugh escaped him. This is absurd. I am in the middle of a presentation, Nadia. Go home. We can sort this out later. We are finished sorting things out, Derek, Nadia said. And you are right, you are in the middle of a presentation, but it looks like you are struggling with the next section of your slides. Let me help you with that. She looked directly at the lens of the camera concealed in the smoke detector. She knew I was there. She gave one slow nod. That was my signal. I straightened up in the van seat. My fingers settled over the keyboard. For the past 2 hours, I had been cutting the footage matching the audio and embedding the file into the building's presentation server. I hit enter. Strike him down. In the boardroom, the massive screen behind Derek flickered. The architectural rendering of the Skyline Tower blinked out. The room dropped into a moment of darkness as the projector reset. Then, a new video began. The audio hit the room hard through the surround sound system. This was not a building on screen. It was a bedroom. My guest bedroom. Giant versions of Derek and Camille, lying in bed with champagne glasses, recorded the night before, just hours after I had walked out the door. The board members drew breath. Whitfield's jaw came unhinged. Camille in the back row slowly covered her mouth with both hands. But what was on screen was almost secondary to what was coming through the speakers. I cannot believe how easy it was. Derek's voice filled the boardroom, bouncing off all 4 walls of glass. The old man is gone. Nadia is practically a vegetable. On the screen, Derek took a long pull of champagne and laughed. Whitfield and the rest of those board members are a pack of old pigs, he went on. They are so desperate for a young genius they will swallow anything I serve them. I could sketch a stick figure and call it minimalism, and they would hand me a check. The room transformed. Shock hardened into fury in a matter of seconds. Whitfield's face climbed through several shades before settling on a deep, livid purple. The investors exchanged glances of undisguised revulsion. On the screen, Camille giggled. But what if Nadia wakes up? What if she figures out the blueprints are hers? The Derek on the screen curled his lip. She won't. I have been dosing her for months. By tomorrow, she will be lucky if she can remember her own name. And if she becomes a problem, well, accidents happen on the highway. The video cut to black. Silence. Dense, total, suffocating silence. Derek stood at the front of the room, immobile. He looked diminished. The arrogance had evaporated completely, leaving something smaller and shaking in its place. His eyes went to the screen, then to the board, then to Nadia. Whitfield rose slowly from his chair. The scrape of it against the floor was the only sound. He did not spare a glance at the slides. He stared at Derek with a contempt that could have scorched metal. A pack of old pigs, Whitfield said very quietly. Derek raised both hands. No, wait. That footage is fabricated. A deep fake. She hacked the system. She is unstable. I told you from the start. She was unstable. A shaking finger extended toward Nadia. You did this, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. You set the whole thing up. You couldn't stand that I was better than you, so you manufactured this entire story. Shut it off, he screamed toward the empty projection booth. Shut it off. Derek made a break for the laptop sitting on the podium, his whole body aimed at it, frantic to destroy it before the truth finished pouring out. Nadia moved first. She planted herself directly in his path without a moment's hesitation. Her hand shot out, snagging his wrist before it could land, and she wrenched it sharply to one side. He cried out and buckled, going down on one knee. That footage is not fabricated, Derek. Nadia told him, her gaze dropping to where he knelt, her expression cold as stone. What you watched is a recollection, and there are thousands more where that came from. She let him go. He lurched backward into the podium and sent it toppling. Whitfield's attention swung to the pair of men posted at the far end of the room. Gentlemen, he said, fury bleeding into every syllable, escort this piece of filth out of my building before I personally put him through the window. Derek scrambled upright, his eyes darting around for a way out, for someone to stand with him. He searched for Camille. She was nowhere. She had already slipped through the side door the moment things turned, looking out for no one but herself. He had nobody. His gaze came back to Nadia one final time. Something unhinged lived behind his eyes, desperation twisted into something uglier. "You think you won," he hissed. "You think this is over. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The smile that crossed Nadia's face was not warm. It was something else entirely. "Oh, I know exactly what you are capable of, Derek," she said. "That is why I did not come alone." Her hand rose toward the door. That was my cue. I stepped through. No gardening clothes on my back. Instead, I had on my old FBI field jacket, the one that had been hanging untouched for 5 years. My cane was with me, but I wasn't leaning on it. I held it out in front of me like I intended to use it. The instant Derek's eyes found mine, something broke behind them. For the first time in that man's sorry life, it registered not just that the deck was stacked against him, but that the game had already ended. The hush that settled over the room after the video felt denser than the steel skeleton of the very skyscraper my daughter had put her soul into designing. It pressed down on everything. All 12 board members sat fixed on the darkened screen, where seconds before they had watched Derek Foxwell mock their judgment and laugh at their expense. Then, one by one, slow as a gun turret tracking its mark, every head in that room rotated toward him. His whole body was shaking. The laser pointer had slid out of his sweat-slicked fingers and skipped across the floor, disappearing under the table. His eyes went to Whitfield, who was easing himself up from the chairman's seat, jaw-tight face carved into something that looked like fury wearing a civil mask. "Mr. Whitfield," Derek managed, both palms raised. "None of that was real. It is a fabrication, a deep fake. She paid someone to put this together and destroy me. The woman is not stable. I warned all of you this was coming." Whitfield offered no reply. He simply regarded Derek with a kind of look you give something unpleasant you found underfoot. That was when I moved. Each tap of my cane against the floor rang out clearly in the stillness. I passed the security guards who had cleared my entry and came to stand shoulder to shoulder with Nadia. She turned and looked at me, the cloudiness that had been living in her eyes for months gone. She gave me one small nod, barely there, but certain. She was ready to finish this. "Who let him in here?" Derek erupted, thrusting a finger at me. "Security removed this man. He has no business being here." "Actually," Whitfield cut in his tone, quiet and edged like a blade, "he has every right to be in this room, Derek. More right than you, in fact." Derek's face went blank. "What does that mean he tends the garden? He sleeps in my guest room." Whitfield looked my way. "Mr. Beaufort, do you want to take it from here, or shall I?" I adjusted my tie, my eyes locked onto Derek's. "Due diligence was never your strong suit," I said, keeping my voice level. "If you had bothered to trace the ownership structure of this firm, you would have found that 6 months ago, a company called Pegasus Holdings acquired a 15% stake in this architectural group." Derek let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "So, what, some shell company picked up a few shares? Am I supposed to care?" "You probably should," I said, "because I am Pegasus Holdings." Every drop of color fell out of Derek's face at once, leaving him looking hollow. His jaw unhinged, but nothing came. "Retirement didn't just leave me with a pension, son." I went on, closing the distance between us by one deliberate step. "I put my money to work, and when I watched my daughter grinding herself down to nothing for this firm, I bought a position here so I could make sure she was protected. I am not simply her father. I am the man you answer to. And as a significant shareholder, I have serious questions about the project you've been claiming as your own." I turned to face the board. If Mr. Foxwell is the true architect of the Skyline Initiative, walking through 3 fundamental questions about the structural engineering should be no problem at all. Whitfield settled back into his seat with a nod. "Go ahead, Mr. Beaufort." I crossed to the building model occupying the center of the table and laid one finger on the glass atrium, cantilevered above the 30th floor. "First question," I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "That atrium sits directly above the L train tracks. Train traffic generates a resonance frequency of 40 hertz. Glass shatters at 40 hertz. Walk me through how the resonance problem was solved without falling back on opaque concrete supports." Derek's throat worked. His gaze moved from the model to me, to the board and back. A sheen of sweat had broken across his collar. "Right, so," he started, voice already wobbling, "we sourced premium glass, German-made, very high strength. And then rubber gaskets, industrial ones, were added around the frames to take the vibration. My expression didn't shift. Rubber gaskets, that is what you're going with. He nodded hard. Yes, high-grade industrial rubber. I looked to Nadia. Mrs. Foxwell, would you like to set the record straight? She moved forward without hesitation. Her eyes went straight to the board, not once to Derek. Rubber gaskets would lose integrity within 6 months, she stated, her voice measured and precise. Thermal expansion alone would destroy them. What I actually designed to address the 40 Hz resonance was a liquid-tuned mass damper system integrated inside the window frames themselves. It runs a glycol solution that counter-oscillates against the vibration frequency, neutralizing both the movement and the sound completely. Whitfield's eyebrow climbed. He looked at Nadia with clear, undisguised admiration. A liquid damper built right into the frame. That is brilliant. Derek's face went crimson. I was getting to that. That is what I meant, the liquid rubber solution. I didn't let him go further. Second question. My finger moved to the antenna spire crowning the structure. At that height above Houston, wind shear can hit 100 miles per hour. A flat profile surface at that elevation produces a vortex shedding effect with enough force to tear the antenna free. What is this spire's drag coefficient? Derek dragged his sleeve across his forehead. The whole room could see him going under. The coefficient, it's within standard range, he said. Aerodynamically sound design, very resistant to wind loading, tunnel tested. Nothing to worry about. I let the silence hold for a moment. Nothing to worry about. That is your engineering assessment. Nadia answered before I had to prompt her. The drag coefficient is 0.35, she said. But drag is not the real threat ice accumulation is. That is why I built an internal heating element into the spire, fed by waste heat pulled from the HVAC system. It keeps ice from forming and sheeting off onto the street below. Whitfield bent toward the blueprint spread across the table. That checks out. The heating schematic is right here, page 50. He glanced up. Derek, how did that detail slip your mind? Derek had taken 2 steps back toward the wall. It slipped. There are a lot of moving pieces in a project this size. I closed the gap until I was near enough to see the fear working in his face. It had a particular smell to it. I recognized it. It smelled like the end. Third question. I said low enough that only the people nearest could hear. And this one is the simplest of all. I tapped the title block printed in the lower right corner of the blueprints on the table. What is the password that unlocks the master source file on the server? Papasto easy was Spanish. Esposto. Derek went rigid. His eyes cut to the laptop, then to the screen. I wrote it down somewhere, he managed. On my phone, I think. I rotated it recently. Security reasons. I turned to Nadia. She was already smiling. Not a happy smile, something quieter, heavier, but absolutely certain. The password, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, is Celeste. Celeste. Something tightened in my chest. My wife's name. Whitfield reached for the laptop connected to the projector and keyed it in. He pressed enter. The file bloomed open on the big screen at the front of the room, and embedded at the base of every single layer in the metadata was one thing, a digital signature bearing the name Nadia Beauford. Another silence fell over the boardroom, but this one had weight behind it. The weight of a verdict. Whitfield rose from his chair, and the look he turned on Derek was no longer anger. It was the look you give something that has fouled the floor beneath you. Mr. Foxwell. Whitfield said, his voice stripped of everything but ice. You are fired. Derek recoiled like he'd taken a blow across the face. Whitfield kept going. That is only the beginning. Our legal team will be filing for corporate espionage, fraud, and theft of intellectual property before the day is out. You are finished in this city. You are finished in this industry. Get him out of my sight. 2 security guards moved in from either side and took Derek by the arms. No, Derek thrashed against their hold, screaming. You cannot do this. I brought you this deal. I am the face of this company. Nadia walked straight up to him. She put herself inches from his face. Her hand went into his jacket pocket and came out with his company ID badge. You were never the face, she said, her voice quiet and even. You were the mask, and the mask just came off. She let the badge drop to the floor. Get him out, Whitfield thundered. The guards hauled Derek toward the double doors. He dug his heels in and kicked like a child throwing a tantrum. His tailored suit was twisted and disheveled. His hair had come undone. Every bit of the polished exterior had collapsed. But right as they reached the door, Derek stopped resisting. His body went slack. Then the laughter started. A low, flat sound, at first almost casual, that climbed into something loud and unhinged, bouncing off the glass walls. It was the sound of a mind coming apart. He craned his neck back to look at us. His eyes were bloodshot and wide open. "You think you won?" he screamed, voice cracking at the edges. "You think this is finished just because you let me go?" His gaze landed on me. "You hold the shares, Clifton. You hold the money. But what I'm holding is leverage." He bared his teeth in a grin. "I know about the Cayman accounts, Whitfield. I know what you paid to the zoning commission last year. Those bribes are documented. I have the emails. I have the ledgers." Whitfield's face went ashen. "And as for you, Nadia," Derek continued, venom saturating every word, "you think you walk out of here free. I am still your husband. Half of everything still belongs to me. And I know every corner you cut in the Skyline budget." He let out another burst of laughter that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Firing me might feel safe. Putting me in the ground might feel safer. But if I leave this room breathing, I am walking straight to the district attorney. And I am pulling every last one of you down with me." The guards shoved him through the doors, and they swung shut, swallowing his laughter mid-note. But the echo of it hung over the room like smoke. Whitfield looked at me, his hands not quite steady. "Is any of that real?" he asked. "Does he actually have something on us?" I fixed my gaze on the closed doors. "He believes he does," I said, both hands resting on my cane. "But he overlooked one thing, which is—" Nadia asked, and I could hear the tremor she was fighting to keep out of her voice. I turned to face them, keeping my expression flat and deliberate. "He forgot that I had a recorder running the whole time. Issuing a blackmail threat is a federal offense." I turned toward the window, where heavy clouds were massing above the city. "He is not walking into the district attorney's office," I said. "He is headed somewhere considerably worse, and I intend to be the one behind the wheel." The boardroom's heavy oak doors didn't just open, they blew inward like something had hit them from the other side. The crash sent the assembled board members lurching back in their leather chairs, startled by the impact against the floor-to-ceiling glass. This wasn't hotel security. It was the Economic Crimes Unit of the Houston Police Department. I had placed the call 2 hours earlier from my surveillance van. I'd forwarded the full digital package to Detective Colton, my old partner from the Bureau, including the confession footage and the wire transfer logs routing funds to the Cayman Islands. Colton hadn't dragged his feet. He came through the doors with 4 uniformed officers at his back badge, catching the sharp light overhead. "Derek Foxwell," Detective Colton announced, his voice filling the room. "You are under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder." Derek's eyes went from the officers to the handcuffs riding on Colton's belt. The blood drained out of his face until he looked like something left out too long in the heat. He stepped backward and bumped into the long walnut dining table. "There has been a mistake here," Derek said, his voice climbing half an octave. "You are not arresting me in this building. Do you know who I am? I am the lead architect on the Skyline Initiative." "Not anymore, Derek," Whitfield said, quietly from his seat at the table. "Take him," Colton ordered. 2 officers moved in with the ease of long practice, each grabbing an arm and pulling them together behind Derek's back. The instant they made contact, something in Derek shifted. The shock burned off, and what replaced it was raw and animal. He wrenched one arm free with a burst of strength nobody expected. "Get off me!" he screamed. "This is harassment. This is police brutality." He whipped around his finger, stabbing the air in my direction. "This whole thing is fabricated," he shouted, nearly spitting. "Take a good look at him. Look at Clifton Beaufort. Do you know what he actually is? He is not some caring father-in-law. He is a crooked ex-fed running a personal vendetta against my family." Derek swept the room, with wild eyes hunting for any board member whose face showed even a trace of doubt. "He put my father behind bars 20 years ago for something he didn't do." His voice was breaking apart. "My father died in that cell because of this man, and now he's running the same play on me. He planted everything you saw. He hacked into my system. He doctored those videos. He is manufacturing a case to hide the fact that his daughter is simply not good enough." I didn't move. I stood where I was, weight on my cane, and let him keep digging. Watching a man unravel like that is an ugly thing, but it is also a reckless one. A person who has fully convinced himself of his own lies will do almost anything. Nadia stepped forward, her face composed. Derek, enough. It is finished. We have the transfers. We have the messages to Camille. Stop. Shut your mouth, Derek snarled, surging toward her. The officers brought him down hard, face first into the carpet. You are part of it too, he grunted as they pinned him. You disloyal little traitor. I built you from nothing. Before me, you were a frightened girl with a sketchbook and no direction. I gave you a future. I gave you belief in yourself. And this is what you do. You side with the man who took your mother from you. Colton pressed a knee into Derek's back and bent close to his ear. You have the right to remain silent, and given that every word coming out of you right now goes straight into my report, I would strongly recommend you exercise it. The ratchet of the handcuffs closing was the finest sound I had heard in years. Click, click, hard and final. They pulled him upright. His suit was a wreck. His hair jutted in every direction, and blood was beading on his lip where the floor had met his face. Something about his eyes had gone to a place beyond reason. He looked untethered from everything. Move him out, Colton said, but the doors swung open before anyone took a step. Hold on, a voice cut across the room. I turned. My stomach dropped. The man walking in was not a police officer. He was dressed in a sharkskin suit that had cost somewhere around $3,000 and carrying a leather briefcase with the quiet confidence of someone who has never lost. I placed him immediately. It was Bram Otley, the most expensive criminal defense attorney in Houston, the kind of lawyer that cartel bosses and hedge fund executives reached for when they needed a verdict reversed on procedural grounds. He was on permanent retainer for Camille's father. Otley crossed straight to Detective Colton without acknowledging the board, without a glance at me, without reacting to any of the chaos around him. He extended a single sheet of paper. Emergency bail order signed by Judge Holloway 5 minutes ago. Otley said, his voice carrying the smooth, unhurried quality of someone who wins for a living. My client has no prior record and presents no flight risk. Arraignment is scheduled for next Tuesday. In the meantime, he is to be released directly into my custody. Colton took the document. His jaw went tight. This man is staring down multiple felony charges, counselor. And not 5 minutes ago, he issued threats against a witness with a full boardroom watching. All of that is for the arraignment, Otley said, the smile on his face showing a few too many teeth. What is happening right now is that you are detaining him contrary to a valid court order. Uncuff him, detective, or I start drafting the unlawful imprisonment filing against the department before we sit down to lunch. Colton's eyes came to me. I gave him one small, barely visible shake of my head. Let it go, Colton. Not here. Not today. Otley was the kind of operator who fed on procedural mistakes. Push back wrong, and he'd use it to chase a mistrial down the road. The long play was the only play we had. Colton exhaled slowly. He unclipped the key from his belt. Turn around, he said to Derek, no warmth in it at all. The cuffs opened with a click. Derek rolled his wrists and winced. He drew a long breath, rolled his shoulders, and straightened what remained of his jacket. He looked at Otley and gave a short nod. Then he turned to face the board members sitting there in stunned silence. I want to apologize for what just happened in this room, Derek said, and incredibly the corporate Polish had crept back into his voice, though something jagged and unstable ran underneath every word. What you have witnessed today is a targeted campaign against me. I will be fully vindicated when this reaches a courtroom, and when that day comes, I will expect a formal apology and my position restored. He moved toward the exit, then stopped directly in front of me. He leaned in until I could have counted the lines on his face. He smelled of fear and sweat, but his eyes burned with a clarity that was colder and more dangerous than the rage had been. Whatever surface he'd been showing, the world was cracking, and what lived underneath it was pure disorder. You played this well, old man, he said low enough for only me to catch. You took my job, you took my reputation, but you forgot one thing. I held his gaze, my face giving him nothing. And what would that be, Derek? You forgot that I have nothing left to lose, he said, his voice dropping to something cold and deliberate. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. You should have let them keep those cuffs on me. You should have let them put me away, because now I am walking out of here free and I am not going anywhere. I am going to see this through to the end. His eyes moved past me to Nadia. Tell her to drive carefully, he whispered. Then he turned and left his lawyer at his side, and the door swallowed him whole, leaving behind a silence you could feel pressing on your chest. I watched the doors until they stopped moving. My hands had the head of my cane in a grip so tight my knuckles had gone white. He wasn't wrong. We had taken the boardroom, but we had just handed him something more unpredictable than defeat. A rat backed into a corner will bite. A rat you set loose will come back carrying something far worse. Colton came over and reholstered his weapon. "I'm sorry, Clifton. The judge is in Camille's father's pocket. My hands were tied." "I know," I said. "None of that is on you." I looked over at Nadia. She had drifted to the window and was staring out over the city below. She wasn't trembling anymore. What was in her face now was anger, clean and steady. "So, what happens next, Dad?" she asked, still facing the glass. I crossed to her and rested my hand on her shoulder. "Now we stop playing their game," I told her. "He wants to be a man with nothing to lose. Fine by me. Let him find out what it looks like to face someone who already lost everything once and decided it would never happen again." I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app. The marker on Derek's car was lit and moving. "Go home, Nadia," I said. "Lock the doors, run the Bluebird protocol. Don't let anyone in except me." "Where are you going?" she asked, turning to look at me, the fear she was fighting visible in her eyes. "To put an end to this," I said. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. Derek Foxwell was free. He was unraveling. And he was capable of real harm, but he had made one serious miscalculation. He believed that threatening my daughter would shake me, that it would push me back. He had it exactly wrong. It just told me I could stop being careful. And tonight, Houston was going to see what a retired auditor could accomplish when he put the spreadsheets down and started keeping a different kind of count. The boardroom victory tasted sweet, but like everything sweet, it didn't last. It left something bitter underneath once it dissolved. We thought we had taken the head off the snake. We forgot that a severed head can still put venom in you. 2 days after Derek was removed from Whitfield Tower, a process server appeared at our front door. He looked harmless, just a tired man working a job, but the envelope he passed to Nadia was a declaration of open war. I sat down at the kitchen table and went through the documents. My hands stayed steady. My blood did not. Derek and Camille were coming after Nadia in court. They had filed a counter-lawsuit defamation of character wrongful termination, emotional distress. But those charges weren't what made my jaw tighten. The real weapon was the motion for an emergency competency hearing. They had submitted the falsified medical records Derek had manufactured. They had submitted sworn affidavits from the doctor Derek had put on his payroll, claiming Nadia was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and early-onset dementia. They were wielding the very symptoms he had engineered through poisoning, as evidence that she couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. They were pushing for a court-appointed conservator, and the name they put forward for that role was Derek Foxwell. It was breathtaking in its cruelty. It was evil dressed up in legal language. And because courts move with the urgency of glaciers, it was gaining traction. Their attorney, Bram Otley, had persuaded a judge to freeze Nadia's assets while the hearing was pending. The accounts were locked. We couldn't even cover the cost of our own legal representation. Nadia sat across the table from me, her face drained of color. "How is this possible, Dad?" she asked, and the tremor in her voice was fury, not fear. "He poisoned me, and now he's turning that against me to take everything." I set the papers down. "They can do this because money talks in a courtroom, Nadia. Bram Otley doesn't get out of bed for under $1,000 an hour. Derek is broke, but Camille isn't. She is funding this entire operation, his rent, his attorney, his bail bond, all of it flowing from her accounts." I got up and went to the window. The sky outside had turned gray and heavy, the kind that promises rain and means it. "As long as Camille keeps backing him, Derek stays dangerous," I said. "She is his lifeline, his shield, and if we want to reach him, we need to break that shield first. I am going to pay her father a visit." Nadia looked up surprised. "Conrad Langston, the man who owns Langston Architects. He despises you, Dad. You went through his firm's books 10 years ago. Despises me? Yes," I said, reaching for my coat. "But there is exactly one thing Conrad Langston despises more than me, and that is someone helping themselves to what is his." I drove to the Langston building in downtown Houston. It rose above the street in black glass, tall and unapologetic, a monument to Conrad Langston's opinion of himself. I hadn't called ahead. There was no point. I walked to the security desk and set a single file folder on the counter. "Let Mr. Langston know that Clifton Beaufort is here," I said to the guard, "and that I'm carrying the financial records for the shell company his daughter set up in the Cayman Islands." 5 minutes later, I was in the private elevator climbing to the penthouse suite. Conrad Langston was waiting. He was a compact man, silver hair eyes like chips of flint. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than my house. He did not rise to greet me. "Beaufort," he said, and the name came off his tongue like something he was spitting out. "You've got nerve walking through my door. My daughter tells me you and your unstable daughter have been running a harassment campaign against her boyfriend." I sat down across from him without waiting to be asked. I laid the folder on the desk. "Your daughter has a colorful version of events, Conrad," I said, keeping my tone level. "But numbers don't tell colorful stories. Numbers don't embellish." Langston looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. "What am I looking at?" "What you're looking at," I said, leaning in, "is documentation that for the last 2 years, Camille has been skimming from your construction contracts, inflating vendor invoices by 15% and routing the difference into a private account." Langston let out a short, humorless laugh. "That is impossible. Camille runs my finance division. She's loyal." "She's in love, Conrad," I said, "and love makes even careful people reckless. She isn't doing this for herself. She is doing it for Derek Foxwell." I opened the folder and directed his attention to the spreadsheet I had assembled from the data pulled off Derek's iPad. "Follow the dates, Conrad. Every time Derek needed to cover car payments, gambling debts, or attorney fees, a transfer moved out of your company accounts into a shell entity called BGM Holdings. BGM standing for the initials of all 3 names tied to that arrangement." Langston stopped laughing. He reached for his reading glasses and bent over the page. The flush drained out of his face, and something pale and very still replaced it. His finger moved along the rows of figures looking for an error he wasn't going to find. $2 million, he said, barely above a whisper. "She funneled $2 million out of your firm to keep a man afloat who has been using her since the beginning," I said. "Derek's side of the arrangement was to deliver the Skyline contract to your firm. She bankrolled him. He was supposed to steal the designs and hand them over. It didn't work. He got fired. He's facing felony charges. And your money is sitting in the legal defense fund of the man who failed her." I sat back and let that land. Conrad Langston was not a sentimental man. He could absorb losses, bad press, difficult people. What he would never absorb was money walking out of his own company, not even if the person carrying it shared his blood. He pressed the intercom on his desk. When he spoke, his voice was quiet in a way that was far more alarming than shouting. "Get Camille up here, now." I stood up. There was no reason for me to stay for what came next. My work was finished. "While you're reviewing things, Conrad," I said, buttoning my coat, "you might want to pull up the corporate credit card statements. I believe a $50,000 retainer for a criminal defense attorney just went onto the company black card." I walked out of the office. As the elevator doors drew together behind me, I heard Conrad Langston's voice bellowing his daughter's name through the corridor. It sounded like something structural giving way. By the time I reached my car, the information had already started moving. My phone buzzed a text from my contact at the bank. "Langston just froze all of Camille's assets. He pulled her signatory authority. She's completely shut out." I let myself smile. The shield was gone. Across town in some expensive hotel room, Derek Foxwell was about to have a very rough afternoon. I can only picture how that conversation went. Camille picking up her phone, expecting her father's voice and his support, only to learn she was fired, cut off, and as good as disowned. The panic, the screaming, and then the moment she understood that the man she had sacrificed everything for was now a liability she could no longer carry. Derek would have been stretched out on the couch with a glass of expensive scotch, waiting for the money to arrive. And then Camille would have turned on him. "Get out," she would have screamed. "My father knows everything. He's cut me off. It's finished, Derek. Get out." Derek would have been thrown out onto the street with nothing but what he was wearing. No money, no attorney, no roof over his head. But a man like Derek doesn't simply quit, strip away the money, the tailored suits, and the thin veneer of respectability, and what you uncover is the animal that was always underneath. And Derek was a cornered animal now. That night, I sat in the living room, with every light off watching the street. I knew he was out there. I knew how desperate he was. The tracking marker on his car had gone still. It was parked in a rough stretch on the South Side territory, known for chop shops and deals conducted in back alleys. I zoomed the map in. He was sitting behind a pawn shop. I knew that place. It was a front for illegal arms dealing. I'd worked that case years back, but never managed to make the charges hold. My stomach dropped. Derek wasn't looking for somewhere to sleep. He wasn't searching for work. He was looking for a solution, the permanent kind. I watched the marker sit motionless for 20 minutes. Then it began to move, fast heading north toward the suburbs toward us. I picked up the phone and called Colton. "He bought a gun," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I can't prove it yet, but he's coming out of the South Side Pawn District." There was a pause. "He has nothing left, Clifton. He's coming straight for you." "I know," I said, checking the magazine of my service pistol. I got up and went to the back door. I threw the deadbolt. I went through the windows one by one. Nadia came down the stairs. She had her pajamas on and a mug of tea in both hands. Her eyes found the gun on the table. "Dad," she whispered, "what is going on?" "Go back upstairs, Nadia," I said, keeping my voice soft and even. "Get into the panic room we put in the master closet. Lock it. Don't come out until you hear the code word. Dad, please." "Bluebird Protocol, Nadia," I told her. "Go." She stood there a moment, then turned and went up the stairs fast. I heard the heavy, solid sound of the panic room door sealing behind her. I was alone in the quiet house. The rain had picked up tapping at the window panes like something trying to get in. I took my seat in the dark facing the front door. Derek Foxwell had lost his position. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his backer and the woman who had been covering his debts. Everything that had made him feel powerful had been peeled away. What was left was a man with a weapon and a score to settle. He thought he was coming here to close things out. He thought he was coming to put down a helpless old man and a vulnerable woman. I rested my hand on my pistol. The steel was cold and familiar against my palm, like something I'd never really put down. "Come on, Derek," I murmured into the dark. "Come and collect what you think you're owed." Headlights swept across the front window. An engine cut off in the driveway. A car door banged shut. Heavy footfalls ground against the gravel. The front door handle twisted. Then a kick. Thud. The door frame cracked but held together. Another. Thud. I raised the gun. I leveled it at the center of the door. He wasn't breaking in to take anything. He was breaking in to end something. And I was the only thing standing between him and my daughter. Tonight, one of us was leaving this house and one was not. I had made a promise at my wife's grave that nothing would ever reach our daughter, not while I was breathing. I drew a slow breath and let it go. The third kick came. The wood gave with a sharp, ugly crack. The door swung inward, and framed in the opening was a silhouette against the storm. Derek soaked through eyes gone somewhere past. Reason one hand wrapped around a black pistol. "Honey, I am home," he screamed, his voice splitting at the edges. I didn't say a word. I thumbed the safety off. "Welcome to the party, son." The storm outside wasn't just weather. It was a portrait of the chaos that had come through my front door. The wind was tearing at the roof, and the rain hammered the windows the way trouble always sounds when it finally arrives. Inside, the darkness was total. Derek had killed the power at the breaker box outside before he ever kicked the door. He thought he was taking away my sight. He thought he was stripping out my advantage. But he had spent his whole life in lit-up boardrooms and climate-controlled offices. I had spent 10 years running raids in places where the only light you got was from a gun going off. He didn't blind me. He just turned the house into terrain I already knew. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, back flat against the wall. My breathing was slow-paced by years of training. My pistol was up near my chest, not raised to aim, just present ready. I could hear him moving in the foyer. His footsteps were heavy and irregular, the gait of a man running on adrenaline and fury. He was breathing in ragged pulls. He caught the corner of the console table, and something ceramic went off the edge and hit the floor. The crack of it breaking rang through the silence like a gunshot. "Come out, Clifton." Derek's voice tore through the dark, shaking with hysteria. "I know you're in here. Stop hiding and face me like a man." He fired blindly into the room. Bang. The muzzle flashed through a white flare across the walls for a fraction of a second, then disappeared. The bullet punched through the drywall 3 feet to my left. He wasn't aiming. He was flailing, trying to shoot what he couldn't see. I didn't move. I didn't give him a sound. Not yet. Timing is everything in a psychological standoff. You let the other man sit inside his own fear long enough that it starts consuming him. I listened as he stumbled into the living room, sweeping the gun in wide arcs at nothing. "Where is she?" Derek shouted. "Where is my wife? Did you stash her somewhere, Nadia? Nadia, come out. Your father can't protect you tonight." I moved, sliding across the hardwood in my socks, placing each step precisely. I knew which boards sang and which ones stayed quiet. I'd walked this house for years in the dark. I made it to the kitchen island and dropped behind the granite. "You're burning through your ammunition, Derek," I said, letting my voice come out of the blackness level and unhurried. "You're going to want what's left when the police show up." Derek whipped around and let off 2 more rounds toward the kitchen. Bang, bang. A cabinet door blew apart and rained splinters down on me. A jar of salsa shattered on the shelf at my back. The sharp smell of it mixed with the bite of cordite in the air. "Shut up!" he screamed. "Shut up and die! The police aren't coming." I cut the landline. I jammed the signal. "It's just the 2 of us, old man." He was either lying or he had come apart enough to believe it. I had reached Colton on a secure satellite line 10 minutes earlier, but let him think he held the advantage. A man who believes he is in control gets reckless. I shifted position, rounding to the far side of the island. "What exactly is the plan, Derek?" I asked, my voice bouncing off the tile. "You put us both in the ground, and then what? You're going to walk away from 2 bodies and a door you kicked in?" "I don't need to answer for anything," Derek said, and the laugh that came with it was wet and fractured. "Home invasion robbery gone wrong. I show up to help, but I was too late. I get to play the grieving hero one more time. I'm good at putting on a show, Clifton. You watch the video. I had everyone fooled for years." He was pushing toward the kitchen now. I could track him by the wet squeak of his shoes on the floor. He was growing bolder. "I had your daughter fooled," he said, the hiss in his voice getting closer. "I made her love me. I made her trust me completely, and then I ground her down. And tonight, I am going to do the same to you." I eased upright on the far side of the refrigerator. I had flanked him. His attention was locked on where my voice had been coming from, not where I actually was. "You didn't grind her down, Derek," I said quietly. "You woke her up, and you never had me fooled, not for a single day. I smelled what you were the moment you first walked into this house 2 years ago. Greed has a particular odor, and you were wearing it like cheap cologne." He spun toward the sound of my voice and leveled the gun. "There you are!" he snarled. He fired. The round clanged off the refrigerator door. He drove forward into the kitchen, charging blind, expecting to find a frightened old man crouched in the corner. But I wasn't there anymore. I had repositioned myself in the pantry doorway. I stepped out from the shadows directly behind him. "Drop it, Derek." He spun on his heel, eyes blown wide. He saw me. He saw the gun leveled at him, but his hand didn't open. He brought his weapon up his throat, releasing something that wasn't really a word, just raw hatred given sound. "Die!" He pulled the trigger. Click. The gun jammed. Cheap rounds, or he had let his grip go loose in the panic and caused a feed failure. It didn't matter. The moment had opened up, and I walked through it. He stared down at the pistol in disbelief, yanking the trigger over and over. Click, click, click. My turn. I didn't shoot him. That would have been too clean, too fast. Shooting him would have handed him an exit he hadn't earned. I wanted the ground to come up and meet him slowly. I put my weapon away and covered the distance in 2 steps. He swung the gun at my head like a club heavy, slow, the kind of move you see outside a dive bar at closing time. I stepped inside his arm before it could land, deflected it upward with my left forearm, and drove the heel of my right hand up under his chin. His teeth cracked together with a sound that turned my stomach. His head rocked back. He staggered, but adrenaline kept him upright. His other fist came around, a looping swing aimed at my ribs. I caught the wrist, rotated it, and torqued his arm behind his back, riding his own momentum into the lock. Standard Krav Maga. Simple. Brutal. I increased the pressure at his elbow. He screamed. The pistol dropped and skittered away across the floor, disappearing under the table. I swept his legs, and he went down hard, face first into the kitchen tile. I put my knee on his spine and held him there. I took his right arm, the one that had signed the stolen checks, the one that had held my daughter, and I lifted it until the shoulder socket said, "No." "Stay down," I said close to his ear. Get off me," he shrieked, thrashing. "You are tearing my arm out." "You tore my daughter apart," I said, quietly tightening my hold. "Think of this as the opening payment on what you owe." He tried to bite me. He actually snapped his teeth at my forearm like an animal. Whatever was left of the man had stopped pretending. I pressed his face into the floor once with enough force to take the fight out of him for a moment. "Stop struggling, Derek. This is done." "No!" He sobbed, blood and dirt smeared across his face. "It is not done. I will kill you, every last one of you. I am Derek Foxwell. I am brilliant. You're nothing. You are just a gardener. I am the man who just put you on the floor without firing a round," I said. Then the darkness outside erupted in red and blue. The sirens hit the air, cutting through the howl of the storm. Tires bit into the driveway gravel. Doors flew open. "Police, open up!" The front door, already hanging off one hinge, was kicked the rest of the way through. Colton came in fast with his weapon out. 4 tactical officers fanning out behind him. Their flashlight beams raked through the smoke and dark. "Drop the weapon!" Colton barked. "He is unarmed," I called back, squinting against the light. "I have him pinned, kitchen floor." The officers moved in. 2 of them hauled Derek up off the ground. I stepped back and raised both hands so everyone could see them. Derek was still fighting, spitting blood, cursing in a constant stream. "He tried to kill me," he screamed, thrusting his good arm in my direction. "Arrest him! He snapped my arm. The man is out of his mind." Colton came to where I was standing. He took in the gun on the floor. He looked at the holes torn through the walls. He looked at Derek, who was still frothing. "You all right, Clifton?" Colton asked, lowering his weapon. "Fine," I said, tugging my jacket back into place. "He did a number on the kitchen, though." Colton turned to face Derek. "Derek Foxwell, you are under arrest for attempted murder, breaking and entering violation of a restraining order, and unlawful possession of a firearm." "Attempted murder." Derek's voice shot upward. "I didn't kill anyone." "You fired 4 shots at a federal officer," Colton said without raising his voice. Derek went still. "What?" Colton pointed at me. "Clifton Beaufort is a retired federal agent. As of tonight, I reinstated his status as a consultant on this operation. You just opened fire on a federal officer. That is a federal charge, son. No bail, no high-dollar attorneys riding to the rescue. You are going to a supermax facility." Whatever had been fueling Derek, the rage, the adrenaline, the warped certainty that he could still win this, drained out of him on the spot. His knees went soft. The officers had to take his weight. He looked at me, and what was in his eyes wasn't anger anymore. It was something smaller and colder. "You set me up," he whispered. "I didn't set you up, Derek," I said, walking toward him and picking up my cane from where I had left it against the wall. "I just let you be exactly who you are." "Take him out," Colton ordered. They pulled him toward the door. He didn't go without sound. He let out a long, ragged wail that filled the house and spilled out into the wet night as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. I stood there and watched the door shut, cutting off his voice mid-cry. The house went quiet. Wind still pressed against the windows outside, but inside the air had stopped moving. The smell of gunpowder sat in the rooms like a visitor that hadn't decided to leave yet. The shattered vase was scattered across the foyer floor. The bullet holes pocked the walls. The house looked like it had been in a fight because it had, but it was still standing. I walked to the foot of the stairs and looked up toward the closet where my daughter had been waiting in the dark. "Bluebird," I said, my voice carrying enough, but not much more. "Protocol complete. Bluebird is clear." A beat of silence. Then the lock turned. Then the door opened. Nadia came out and stood at the top of the stairs, taking in the wreckage below the destroyed kitchen, the ruined walls, me standing at the center of it all. She didn't rush. She came down slowly, deliberately. She walked across what was left of the kitchen floor, put her arms around me, and pressed her face against my chest. She was trembling. "Is he gone?" she asked. I put my lips to the top of her head and breathed in the scent of her hair. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "The wolf is gone." And I held her and told myself silently, as I had told myself every day since I buried my wife, that nothing was ever going to reach this girl again. We had come through the storm, but looking at the shattered state of our home, of our lives, I knew the real work wasn't the fight. It was everything that came after. The crack of a gavel is a small flat sound, no echo. It simply closes things. 30 days after the police walked Derek Foxwell out of my kitchen in handcuffs, I sat in the last row of the federal district court and watched what remained of him face judgment. He bore no resemblance to the arrogant man who had stood in that boardroom. The tailored suits were gone. In their place was a bright orange jumpsuit that swallowed his frame. The hair he used to shape every morning for an hour had been cropped close to the skull. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at us. The federal prosecutor didn't need theatrics. The evidence I had assembled spoke clearly enough on its own. The confession footage, the wire transfer records routing funds to the Cayman Islands, testimony from the mechanic who had tampered with the brake lines on Nadia's car, and the attempted murder of a federal agent. When the judge read the verdict, the courtroom was so still you could pick out the hum of the ventilation system. 20 years in a federal penitentiary. No possibility of parole for the first 15. Derek didn't scream. He didn't break down. He simply folded forward as if whatever had been holding him together finally let go. The marshals walked him out, the chains at his ankles ticking against the floor with each step. A cold, measured sound. The sound of a man who had staked his entire life on greed and come up empty. Nadia was seated beside me. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She watched him move through the side door and disappear behind it. When it clicked shut, she exhaled long and slow. It was the first breath in years that was entirely her own. We stepped out of the courthouse into the bright Houston afternoon. The press had gathered, of course, the story of the architect who had tried to destroy his wife, and her father had held the front pages for weeks. But Nadia didn't shrink. She moved through the cameras with her chin up and her eyes forward. At the bottom of the steps, her attorney was waiting with a document in hand. "It's finished," her attorney said, extending a pen. Nadia took it. The paper was the final divorce decree. She signed it resting on the hood of the car. Her hand didn't waver. The signature was clear and deliberate. She passed the paper back. Then she looked at me, and her face opened into a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen from her in longer than I wanted to count. "Let's go home, Dad." That night, the house felt like somewhere different than it had been. The bullet holes in the walls were patched and painted. The shattered front door had been replaced with reinforced steel. But the real change was in the atmosphere itself. The heaviness had lifted. The smell of fear was gone. It was 2 a.m. I found myself standing in the kitchen just like the very first night, only this time every light was burning. The kettle was humming on the stove. Nadia sat at the island, not hunched over in exhaustion, but with a book open in her hands. She glanced up the moment I came in. "I figured you'd be awake," she said, filling 2 mugs with tea. "Some habits just won't quit." I pulled out the stool across from her and sat down. Steam rose between us in slow curls. I studied her face. She looked younger somehow. The shadows beneath her eyes had begun to fade. The spark was back. "Nadia," I said quietly, both hands wrapped around the warm mug. "There are things we need to talk about, things I've kept from you, things about who I really am." She took a slow sip, watching me over the rim. "You mean the fact that you're not simply a retired government worker scraping by on a fixed pension?" I paused, caught off guard. "You know," Nadia smiled. "Dad, you brought in the most expensive forensic team in the city to audit Derek. You acquired a 15% stake in my company through a shell corporation called Pegasus Holdings, and you overhauled this entire house's security system in a single afternoon. I may have been too worn down to see straight before, but I'm not blind." I exhaled, settling back in my chair. "The last thing I ever wanted was to deceive you, Nadia. When your mother passed, I liquidated everything. The investments, the properties, the offshore accounts from my consulting years. I folded it all into trusts. I wanted a quiet life. I just wanted to be a gardener. I thought if I appeared poor, if I appeared weak, the world would leave us in peace." I reached across and took her hand. "But when I saw what he was doing to you, I understood that being harmless wasn't a virtue. It was a weakness. I created Pegasus Holdings, not to control your life, but to catch him in his. I needed to get inside the books." I stopped, eyes drifting to the spot at the kitchen counter where Derek used to stand and hold court. "I am a wealthy man, Nadia. Between the money recovered from the Cayman accounts and the growth of my own assets, you never have to work another day in your life, if that's what you choose. We could sell this house. We could go to Italy. We could grow grapes and let the name Derek Foxwell dissolve into nothing." Nadia squeezed my hand. Her eyes shimmered, but the tears didn't fall. "I don't want to run, Dad," she said softly. "And I'm not walking away from my work. That Building the Skyline initiative, it's mine. I designed every beam. I ran every calculation. If I leave now, I hand him the victory. I let him take the thing I love most." She pushed back from the island and crossed to the refrigerator. She drew out a fresh roll of blueprints, spreading them flat across the counter. "I bought out the remaining partners," she said, with a little quiet help from a silent investor called Pegasus Holdings. I felt a smile pull at my mouth. "So you're the CEO now?" "I am the CEO," Nadia said, correcting me, "and the lead architect. And the first thing I did was change the building's name. It's not the Skyline Initiative anymore." She pressed her finger to the title block, the Celeste Tower. A tightness gathered in my throat. I stared at that name, in bold, clean letters, my wife's name rising 100 stories above the city she had loved. "It's perfect," I managed barely above a whisper. Nadia came around the island and put her arms around me. She rested her head against my shoulder, the way she had when she was small. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Thank you for pulling me back, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." I held her close and shut my eyes. "I didn't save you, Nadia," I said. "I just helped you remember who you are. You saved yourself. You walked into that boardroom. You stood your ground. I only opened the door." We stayed like that in the stillness of the kitchen, father and daughter survivors of a war the rest of the world never even knew was being fought. The storm had blown through. The sun was preparing to rise on something new, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I didn't dread what the morning was going to ask of me. 6 months on, and life has settled into a new kind of rhythm. I'm back in the garden. The gardenias are blooming better than they have in years. The soil is dark and rich under my fingernails. Neighbors pass on the sidewalk and wave. They see an old man in a straw hat tending his beds. "Morning Clifton," they call. The garden's looking beautiful. I wave back and smile. What they don't see is the concealed weapon or the encrypted security grid I'm monitoring that covers a 3-block radius. Derek is in a federal prison in Texas. I have a contact on the inside, a guard who owes me a favor. He tells me Derek spends his days in the library poring over law books, hunting for a crack in his sentence. He won't find one. I built that case file myself. It is watertight, but let him search. Hope is a terrible gift to hand a man with no future. Nadia comes for dinner every Sunday. She drives a new car. She wears her hair loose. She laughs fully, genuinely. The Celeste Tower is halfway up. The steel frame is already reshaping the city's outline. She brings photographs of the progress. She tells me about the board meetings where she sits at the head of the table. She talks about letting go of the people who doubted her and bringing on young, hungry architects who remind her of who she used to be. She is happy. She is strong. She is free. Some evenings I sit on the porch and watch the light drain from the sky. I think about the night I found her asleep at her desk. I think about the blue glow of her phone and the email that set everything in motion. It frightens me sometimes how close we came to losing it all. If I hadn't gotten up for a glass of water, if I had been just a little more checked out, if I had been nothing more than a gardener. But I wasn't. People say children need protection. They say you should shield them from the world's worst edges. Keep them inside a bubble where nothing can reach them. I believed that once. I tried to give Nadia exactly that. I bought her a house. I gave her money, everything I thought would cushion her. I tried to hand her a perfect life, and that bubble nearly destroyed her. It kept her from seeing the predator beside her. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled now, caked with dirt, but still strong. What I've come to understand is that fatherhood isn't about building walls around your child. Walls can be scaled. Walls can be torn down. Being a father is about teaching your child how to fight. It's about showing them where the danger hides. It's about pressing the right weapon into their hands when the moment demands it. I watched Nadia pull away last night. Her taillights shrank and vanished into the dark. She doesn't need me standing guard anymore. She monitors her own accounts. She secures her own data. She trusts, but she verifies. She isn't safe because I'm watching over her shoulder. She's safe because she learned to watch out for herself. I reach for my trowel and press it into the earth. Protecting a child isn't about locking them inside a glass cage. It's about giving them the strength to shatter it when the air inside begins to run out. And if anyone ever tries to cage my daughter again, the glass won't be their problem. The gardener will be, and I keep a great many very sharp tools. I once believed that loving my daughter meant keeping the darkness of the world at arm's length from her. But what I learned is that the deepest act of love isn't raising walls to hold the monsters back. It's teaching your child how to face them. Nadia didn't survive because I rescued her. She survived because she discovered the steel running through her own spine. We confuse silence with peace far too easily, and compliance with loyalty. But real strength tends to be quiet, patient waiting for exactly the right moment to show itself. Never count out the ones who listen more than they talk. And that is where we leave Clifton and Nadia, not at the beginning of a war, but on the far side of one, standing in a quiet kitchen at 2 in the morning, finally breathing free. This journey cost more than I can easily put into words. There were nights I wondered if I had already lost her, if the man in her home had taken too much for too long. I believe God kept me awake that one particular night for a reason. The timing was not mine. It never is. But looking back now, watching Nadia grow into someone who checks her own accounts and secures her own data, I understand that everything we endured had a purpose larger than either of us could see in the middle of it. If this family revenge story taught me anything, I hope it passes something useful on to you. First, never confuse a quiet person for a powerless one. The ones who observe and say little are often the ones who see everything. Second, protecting someone you love does not mean removing every obstacle from their path. It means making sure they know how to walk one. Third, if someone in your life is slowly becoming a smaller, dimmer version of themselves, do not wait for proof before you start paying attention. Fourth, a person's history with you does not protect you from their agenda. Know who benefits from your silence. For everyone in the adults 50-plus community who has ever quietly held a family together, while the world assumed you were simply getting older and fading out, this story is for you. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that wisdom and patience are not weaknesses. They are the sharpest tools in the shed. Leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, so you're here for every chapter, thank you for listening all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one.